professional to understand how the legal and regulatory measures work towards healthy diets and
Hello, morning.
sorry about that. I think I had just jumped out. Sorry for that. And we are today going to be joined by speakers who are well versed with information and knowledge on healthy diets and the law. And among the panelists today who are joining us on the call, we have Dr. Peter Milton Lukundo. He's a nutritionist. He is a dietitian and a nutritionist, and is also a holder of the doctorate in philosophy, specifically in human nutrition. This is he acquired it from the University of Oslo, Norway, and he looks the in-depth discussions to do with the human rights to adequate food. And he is currently the senior lecturer at the Department of Nutrition Science and Dietetics at University of Chambogo. And he is also a nutritional consultant with the FAO. So looking at his expertise, we hope to get an opening on setting pace on how healthy diets roll out in our day-to-day lives. And we have Director Ruth Sechindi on the call, who will take us to, he's a human rights lawyer and currently Director for Monitoring and Inspections at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. And she is the Uganda Law Society Award winner of the Best Human Rights Defender of the year 2017. She was also selected by Uganda Law Society as among the best female lawyers in Uganda. And our third facilitator today is Counsel Silva Kayondo. He's a partner at Octas Advocates. He has expertise in the technology, media, and telecommunications, TMT, and intellectual property, corporate, and finance advisory. He assists in offering advisory services to in-house and also law firms at the international level on cross-border matters. And in this, we see that he looks at the regional, international litigation. And he was also an enthusiast in life sciences and healthcare. And our last panelist today, we have Counsel David Kawanda. He is a social justice lawyer with expertise in social economic rights, or specifically looking at promoting the right to adequate food in Uganda and at the East African level, and also broadly at the regional and the international level. He is a celebrated social justice lawyer who has created jurisprudence in promoting the right to health and food. And he is also the founder and the executive director at CEFROT. Today, those are our panelists that we shall hear from. I encourage everyone to engage, to ask questions, and also to directly infuse this discussion into their daily activities. We are honored. This is not coming up out of the blue. However, we see that these people who are going to talk to us are coming under the umbrella of the Uganda Society Food and Nutrition Law Cluster, which is hosted by the Center for Food and Adequate Living Rights. And this cluster was established to speak about the healthy dietary environments and also enable the legal field to understand their role in this circle of promoting healthy diets and also their daily lives, because we know that food is a daily activity everyone has to eat. So it came after the discussion with the Uganda Law Society, where the Center for Food and Adequate Living Rights saw it as a gap, and we had to start these discussions. And here we look, when someone listens and talks about the Center for Food and Adequate Living Rights, it is a non-for-profit organization that works towards promoting legal and policy environments in promoting the right to adequate food. Today, the moderator is personally Jonathan Luvega, and I'm the programs coordinator at the Center for Food and Adequate Living Rights. Allow me to dive into the agenda for today. Our agenda was logging in and registration of participants. I encourage participants to register into this discussion. And also the second item on agenda, we shall have opening remarks from the Uganda Law Society CEO, and we shall then have an understanding of the food and nutrition environment in Uganda. This will open up our space in understanding of what it is to us and why it is important to have these discussions. Dr. Peter Lukundo will take us through this, and we shall have an understanding of the legality of the right to adequate food and the normative content on this broad aspect. And this will be Director Ruth Sechindi taking us through this. After the two discussions, we shall then have a plenary where we encourage all participants to raise issues and also ask questions to the facilitators, and also we shall get response therein. And then the second last item will be addressing the risk towards achieving the right to food in Uganda, a close reflection on the GMO twist. This will be taken us through by Council Silva Kayondo, and then we shall have a discussion on underscoring the role of public interest litigation in shaping the legal and policy environment for Uganda's food system. This will be taken us through by Council David Kabanda. And after that discussion, we shall have a plenary session, and at the end of that plenary session, we shall have parting shots from the facilitators, and then we shall close the discussion. At this, without further ado, I wish to call upon the ULSCS CEO, Mr. Moses Okwaling, to kindly give us welcoming remarks as we then prepare to kickstart the deep discussions on this subject matter. Thank you so much, Mr. Moses. Kindly unmute.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator of the day. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, members online. I bring you greetings from the Executive Council, as well as the Secretariat of the Uganda Law Society. My name is Moses Okwalinga. I serve as the CEO at the Uganda Law Society, and I'm glad that we are able to have you on this call this morning. Allow me to thank the members who have been able to join, to log on, as well as our facilitators in a special way. The Food and Agri Cluster, as well as Sefrod, as well as our facilitators, Dr. Peter Lukundo, Ruth Sechindi from the Commission. I don't know if Ruth Sechindi from Uganda Human Rights Commission, Advocate Silva Kayondo from OTAS, Mr. David Kabanda from Sefrod, and every other person, as well as the team from the Secretariat that has helped us put this together. I know food might not be very popular amongst the lawyers. Most of them find it difficult related to the law. So the cluster, you have a very big task to make sure the membership appreciates the issues we discuss around food, nutrition, and the law. And this will go a long way in encouraging most members to live healthy. I'm glad that we're having this conversation because health, nutrition is a very important aspect of our lives, and how it interfaces with the law is very vital for every lawyer. And I encourage the cluster to continue, whether it's webinars or occasional engagements with the members, that each one of them appreciates the need to take into consideration food and nutrition, as well as its interface with the law. At this juncture, allow me to thank you all for being online and attending, and wish you fruitful deliberations. Thank you very much, and have a blessed day.
Thank you so much, our CEO at the Uganda Law Society. We are taking up this mantle, and we are looking forward to having a deep digest. We are building this for everyone to relate it, as the CEO has stated in his welcoming remarks. And we saw it important to have not only the legal minds speaking about it, but also have the actual facilitator who is dealing directly in promoting the right to adequate food, and his expertise is way beyond that we surely need to take in and understand this aspect in our context. He's going to help us contextualize it. Dr. Peter Milton, Lukundo, you can kindly unmute and give us a deep digest of this. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and thank you so much, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. All protocol observed, with due respect to the team from Uganda Law Society and my brothers from Sefrod and my senior colleague Ruth from the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Good morning to everybody. Yes, as indicated, I'm called Peter Milton Lukundo. I'm a senior lecturer at Chambergo University in the Department of Nutritional Science and Dietetics. And today I'll be sharing with you some insights or highlights really around nutrition, as indicated, giving a snapshot of the food and nutrition environment in Uganda, but also trying to relate it to the law, though with my limitations notwithstanding, bearing in mind also that my other colleagues will give more justice to that subject. But I welcome you to this meeting and engagement. We rarely have these engagements with lawyers, but we feel that the more we engage, the better. And of course, it comes at a backdrop of limited engagement by the legal fraternity in issues of economic, social, and cultural rights. So hopefully these discussions can provide more, one would say, empowerment, perhaps, to some of our colleagues in the fraternity to be able to advance these social, economic matters of national importance. And indeed, we're going to see that as lawyers, we promote human rights, and the rights around food, around nutrition are fundamental rights, which we cannot underlook. So colleagues, I'll share with you shortly. I hope my screen is visible to all. Jonathan can confirm in case there's a problem. we shall proceed.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, as a teacher as part of my job, since I was told it's more of a session of sharing and learning, I thought we could also have some outcomes which we could tag to this session. It's brief, 20 minutes, quite short. I'll be very rapid in my approach. But generally, we hope that at the end of this session, you'll be able to utilize some of the key concepts that will be emerging in food and nutrition within your legal practice. We are also hoping that you're able to discern some of the food system issues. Now are beginning to have terminologies here which I'll unpack in terms of the drivers, components, and outcomes using a legal perspective. I'm also anticipating that you'll apply context of physical activity in the promotion of optimal nutrition and well-being, and above all, that you'll advocate for healthy diets and the human right to adequate food in its entire sense, as we shall hear today in terms of its normative content from Director Ruth, and I think my brother also, David, will be expounding further on that area. As a background, ladies and gentlemen, really nutrition, which is the core outcome of various food systems, is an issue which is of growing debate and significance, because literally our health is built around it, but also survival of this planet is really depending on how we deal with matters that provide us food, but also matters that influence nutrition. So it's a core outcome of various systems. For us to achieve good nutrition, it does not depend on availability of food. And that's the biggest problem people have, that people tend to think that good nutrition is all about food security or food availability, which is not the case. Food availability, yes, is necessary to achieve nutrition, but it is not sufficient. That is a major principle we apply here, perhaps also in law you apply it. But we see we need also to be having an interplay of the health system, meaning that we need to prevent diseases, because once you catch a disease, the first culprit will be nutrition, because you'll not have appetite, things will not be working in terms of the body utilizing the food that you eat. And so the internal, what we call biochemistry for the non-science people, the internal mechanism within which food is assimilated and utilized for giving us the nutrition are hampered. And therefore, if you want to improve nutrition, we must also prevent catching disease. Of course, then the other water is another issue. Water is key, water in terms of water, sanitation and hygiene, but also water for your body to operate, but also the hygiene dimensions that link to the disease, of course, and the food security. It's a big debate around water and how it influences food and nutrition. But then we have education, we have the environment, all these, and there are many others, do affect nutrition. So when we talk about nutrition, bear in mind that there are very many dots and issues around it that influence it in terms of the positive, but also in terms of the negative. And if we are to achieve a good nutritional status, then we must make sure, yes, we have food. We are also having a good health in terms of preventing diseases, because once we catch them, then we're going into that problem. But then the water should be safe. People must be made aware about the choices of food and what they need to eat, and the environment should not be one that causes problems. So the food system really is the biggest potential here, contributing around 60 to 70% to nutrition, but also it influences attainment of development in all its forms. I think one of the reasons why we're debating today is that food is at the center of very many debates. And for us, if Uganda, for example, utilize this food system very well, people will tell you this country would have developed long time ago. But the fact that we have not utilized it, then we have not really fully benefited from its potential. But the food system provides potential in terms of industry, in terms of health and nutrition, like we have said, in terms of employment, in terms of export, import, and so many things that we can talk about. However, ladies and gentlemen, the unhealthy food environment exposes us to very many problems. And the problems are gradual, they're not be seen immediately. And we see now the big driver of mortality and disease. Actually, around the world, there's a surge in diet-related non-communicable diseases. I don't know whether any of you has visited the Cancer Institute of late. You will be shocked when you reach there. They are competing for beds. The beds are not there, and everybody literally is struggling to really prolong death. But when you go back to the behind what happened, then there are so many things to be blamed. But the biggest one, which we never see, is the diet. The food that you and me are eating cumulatively over a day, months, and years is partly responsible and may be responsible for what is to come in the coming future in terms of your health. The diabetes, the cancers, and it's like we're going to see, are worrying. They are surging. All of us are at risk. Either we have lost a relative, or we have relatives who are suffering, or we are coming there as well. And as we grow older, me, I'm just around the 40s, then it's fait accompli. It's obvious that if your diet is poor, then you are going to really faster move and graduate into that poor health situation. And as you grow older, you need to be very more cautious. It's a big challenge, but we have to be cautious with that. And of course, that is linked to physical activity. We talk about a DPL problem for nutrition. DPL, D for diet, P for physical activity, L for lifestyle. So if you want to really sort and try to be cautious or guide anybody around nutrition, think about at least those minimum 3 areas: diet, physical activity, lifestyle. What are you eating over time? And how healthy is it? How is your physical activity? Are you leading a sedentary lifestyle? We're all having cars now, and there's a problem. Are we trying to spend at least 45 minutes every day on an active physical regime that can give us some level of energy expenditure? And then thirdly, what is our lifestyle in terms of snacking, alcohol, etc.? Even the way you lead your lives in terms of your work ethic. Sometimes you are missing meals, and other times you're overcompensating. That lifestyle with the stress and etc. that comes with it will impact on your health and your nutrition negatively or positively, depending on how you are dealing with it. So we need to be cautious about the DPL. It won't help if you are jogging every day, but eating so heavily and drinking so heavily. It won't help if you're eating so well, but your physical activity is poor, and also your lifestyles are poor. So all these have to be taken into consideration. I wanted to jump this one, that the food system now has been profiled, that when we talk about food and nutrition, we only say nutrition is an outcome of very many things like I've been talking about. And as you see here, nutrition is at the extreme right there. And it comes from the diets and the consumer behavior, but all these are affected by a number of factors. At the top, those 5 are drivers. What are the drivers of the food system? The food system is at the middle there. We have the food supply chains, food environment, consumer behavior, diets. Those are the food, that's the food system angle. But the drivers up there are many. What is influencing food chains? What is influencing the food environment and consumer behavior? We have the environment that we live in, the natural resources, the rivers, the lakes, the climate change. If we don't deal with them, food supply will be a problem. The technology, innovations, infrastructure, those affect food. The economic and politics, the socio-cultural, very common, and the demographics, the urbanization, the globalization, these migration things, population dynamics, and etc. But the food system core aspects influenced are the food supply chains. If those chains are giving us poor diets or unhealthy diets, we shall have unhealthy food environments. Storage and distribution, big problems. Even in production, for example, now people are using agrochemicals, and then there's a lot of problems around aflatoxin, around all these chemical pollutions, pollutants that affect our health. Storage and distribution. Food may be well produced. There are poor stores, poor distribution. You see how vegetables are being transported on the border, how the meat is being very unhygienic situation sometimes. Processing and packaging. These guys doing processing are adding minerals, sodium. They are adding many unhealthy components. So if we are not cautious with our choices on processed and packaged commodities, then we are going to have problems. Retail and markets. These guys are advertising heavily. Take one, buy one, take one for free. That is a killer. Why? Because then it's going to affect your choice. You're going to consume that a lot, and your consumer behavior will be tainted, tailored towards unhealthy diet. So the food environment then is where the food is available and accessible. And there's a mix of factors that influence our choice, but also factors that influence quality and safety. Those affect consumer behavior. The diet then you're taking in is either poor or good quality, and that affects your nutrition. But of course, that is supported by the political and legal regimes that are existing within a country. So that is the food system, but we can't say the food system is sufficient in itself. We have to also talk about health and wellness, like I talked about. And issues of physical fitness are key, physical activity, our choices. Sleep, some people are thinking it's not important, but increasingly it affects the working modalities of the body, and therefore it can affect nutrition and also the stressful environments. And we're saying, please be cautious about these 4 areas. The interest of time, the FIT principle comes in very handy for physical activity, that as you think about physical activity, which is good for your heart and for your health, think about the frequency. How frequent are you with it? The intensity in terms of, if you have targets in terms of energy loss and etc., the time and the type. Some activities are more rigorous than others. Actually, we may discourage them for some people, but while others are modest for others. But the best, I always tell people, walking and a small jogging are very much desired, or anaerobic exercises in gyms and etc., which are controlled, are good. But heavy can also be good, although sometimes heavy for the body. This I will jump, but I'll just emphasize that the health eating plate, which is now a common instrument advanced by Harvard Medical School, but now adopted by literally all of us in the world. Now I said, yeah, we can't have a healthy eating plate without being active. So I just want to emphasize that stay active on our left, but generally, when we talk about healthy eating, we need to look at less of animal protein, more of whole grains and vegetables and fruits, and of course, water and etc. Some have criticized this as being generic, so general, but the whole point is, please, as we grow older, minimize on those animal-based sources and processed foods, because then you're limiting or avoiding unhealthy components that would affect negatively on your nutrition and your health. So when this I have explained the food system drivers, this was just a pictorial to show you that yes, things up there influence things in the middle, and the outcomes, as you see, nutrition and health. So increasingly we're telling people, yes, for us to achieve good nutrition, it's not about what you're going to eat now, but it starts from behind. How was it produced? How was that food transported? How was that food then handled at the market level? Not really what is on the plate. What's on the plate is just what has been moving all through those channels. And if those channels are not good enough to sieve out the problems, then you're in trouble. And the drivers, I will try to move faster on this other slide to show you that actually from the causes of malnutrition as we know them, diet and disease stand out. But those can only be contextualized if we understand how the food was obtained, the care practices. Care is very important, disease prevention, childhood care and etc., and the sanitation and hygiene. But also from a human rights angle and from a governance perspective, the basic causes is where our trouble is. If we have a good governance mechanism, coordination, and effective legal frameworks, like you are lawyers here, to really support the exploitation of our resources, then we could see that we could limit all these problems that we are facing. So nutrition problems ideally can be addressed through a number of channels within the food system. That is looking at the food supply chains, how is food moving? Like now there's a big problem. You are going to eat maize or fish or milk, but if the milk was poisoned at the time of its production, then you are really innocently poisoned as well, because for you don't know, you can't see these things. So we are saying for sustainability, we have to begin back downstream and also deal with consumer behavior issues in terms of choice so as to improve the nutrition outcomes. And maybe something of really interest to me is the diet angle, since we're into more of a nutritionist. When we talk about diet, people tend to confuse it with food and meals. And that's another lecture. I have no time for this, maybe in this meeting. But food is that physical item, whether liquid or solid, that you eat for nourishment. Meal is the combination of food that are eaten at a point in time. So if you go for breakfast, that is a meal, but the meal had foods or food. But then diet is beyond meal. Diet is a collection of meals eaten over a period of time, not less than 24 hours. So we cannot talk about diet at breakfast. No, we talk about diet yesterday or collectively, or diet last week. And when we talk about diet, we look at the combination of meals. How much have they supplied? Was it adequate? And was it balanced? How do you know whether it is adequate? All of us, by our age and sex, we know how much we should take in for calories, for example, how much you take in for proteins per day, and how much you take in for vitamins and etc. So the question is, from what you ate yesterday or the last 24 hours, did you meet those thresholds for what you require per day in terms of quality and quantity? If you did, then you met the balanced or adequate diet criteria. But if over the day you ate well at lunch and jumped many things, and then you expect that you ate well, no. Collectively, we shall see what did you eat over the whole day. And when we look at that, look at the quantity, the quality, diversity in terms of food groups. You may eat posho and rice, and you also eat kalo. You think you've eaten good food, but that's one group. Those are cereals. And therefore, it's just one scope diversity. So better you go for different groups. You eat, yes, from the kalo or the maize, you jump and go to the potato, jump and go to the vegetables, jump and go to the fruits, different groups, so that you have different diversity. But when you eat from one group, many fruits, many vegetables, that is one scope, and therefore it's not adequate. Safety, a very big crisis for Uganda. I don't think we can overemphasize it. There's a big crisis with aflatoxins, these chemical pollutants in food and etc. So the healthy diets component then comes in. What are healthy diets? Healthy diets, therefore, are diets, to cut a long story short, that are low in risky compounds, or are low in components that are risky to our health. So when we talk about healthy diets, we're talking about diets low in sodium or salt, because salt is not good for our heart. It has a high risk for cardiovascular diseases. When we talk about healthy diets, are diets which are with safe food, so low aflatoxin, etc. The diets which are also low in sugar, because sugar is terrible. The more sugar you get as an adult, the more the risk of you gaining more calories that are converted into fat and other elements, and also low in other harmful compounds that we call bioactive compounds. And of course, healthy diets then drive to nutritious food, that food which has all the nutrients. So, but nutritious food may end up, sometimes we always say why we say nutritious and healthy diets. The food may have all the nutrients. Yes, it's good. You have put fruits and vegetables there, or the food like milk has all the nutrients. But then if it has been processed and they have added too much sugar or salt, then it becomes nutritious yet unhealthy. So we have to balance these two dimensions. And healthy harming substances, some of those I'll be talking about. Fats, I had not talked about it, but also we must contextualize them. So really, yes, I will try to jump some. I've tried to talk about the supply chains. I'm just unpacking the other elements of the food system. As you can see, all these are areas of legal interest. For example, as a law firm, how are you dealing with the issues of unsustainable production? How are you dealing with issues of storage? People are not storing food well. Now there's a problem of autopsy and distribution. People are carrying meat unhygienically. People are carrying vegetables on border. What are we doing as lawyers there? Processing, good processing practices. There are big problems around labeling. In fact, the processing industry, there are many, many issues there. Retail and marketing. There are marketing products all over schools. Coca-Cola is all over. All these, with due respect, these companies. But is the marketing healthy for our children and etc.? What are we doing as well? So all these areas are areas we can deal with. But the food environment is now the core area. That place where food is made available to you and me, the restaurants, the markets, the etc., is now the major focus. Because the argument is these guys are using all sorts of tricks to change our food habits and choices. And therefore, if we don't tackle the food environment, then we are finished. And really, the unhealthy food environments are our focus. And here we're talking about food which are unhealthy. So can we have healthy snacks in these food environments? Can people preparing those deep fried foods appreciate that this is unhealthy? Then there should be options or information for you to know and eat. So at the end of the day, the food is being produced, but the food environment is manipulating it in terms of improving its outlook, capturing your mind and mouth and etc. And then ultimately your choice is gone. And what happens then? You have unhealthy choices. So the food environment becomes an area of focus. And when we talk about the food environment, it's an issue of physical availability. Are foods available? If pizzas were not there, we wouldn't access them. I tell people, we began eating these foods recently. When we were in school, there were no, even sausages weren't there. But now they have come, they're available. The prices, we have been pushing for more tax on fat, like in Denmark and other countries. The more there's tax, the more price, the less access. But there's a challenge. Or we improve the price for healthy foods. Let tomatoes be very cheap and others, and let these other foods be very expensive. Promotion and advertising, there's a big crisis there, and lawyers haven't helped us because there's a lot of misleading advertisement. There are very many brothers of ours, even in the medical profession, some of you know them, who at times are misleading. So all these, the UCC has not come to bear in terms of really protecting the ordinary mwananchi. Food quality and safety, we can spend the whole day on that topic. So we need to address all these angles in terms of physical measures, curtail advertising, address issues of food transformation in terms of processing, have good processing practices, issues of labeling. I think Dr. Bana Kawanda has been on it and he will highlight it, and etc. Consumer behavior may not change much, but we always say we can structure the environment and therefore really raise the consciousness of the public about the need to have appropriate food choices. And I think as lawyers, we have a role to play. Through the litigation, we can create awareness around this issue. I will try to move faster. The principles of making healthy diets possible. I'll share with you this slide, so kindly bear with me. I'm just trying to emphasize some key areas. They gave me limited time. But the key principles here, as I showed you, is diversity is key, ensuring that also we can afford the prices. So really, can we agitate for that? And can we have foods produced sustainably using a low environmental footprint? Issues to do with carbon emission. Like now the story around very soon, we may not have meat because the land is limited. These animals take a lot of energy to be produced, and therefore they are not sustainable. Then, of course, issues of consumer awareness and willingness are very, very key. And FAO has even given us 3 key areas. In summary, healthy diets, nutrient adequacy. So we said you may have the nutrient adequacy, but is it healthy? If they process and add more sodium or sugar, then the food becomes nutritious but unhealthy. But energy is a bottom line that under all difficult circumstances, at a bare minimum, at least get enough energy, calories for survival. Now, as I wind up in 2 minutes or 3, I just wanted to tell you the story about Uganda, because I've tried to give you the nitty-gritties here and there. But Uganda, my dear friends, we're on the crossroads. There are multiple burdens of malnutrition currently. On one hand, the stunting is at 29%. The state has reduced now to 25%. We're having a report coming up, I think, next year or late this year. And I'm under 5 children. Can you imagine? For every 10 children, 3 are stunted. And for you, the lawyers, I think for you are not been stunted. If you are stunted, you could have not achieved that feat, because stunting affects cognitive development. In fact, the problem of Uganda's planning today is partly because over 55% of current working Ugandans were stunted as children. There was high level of stunting in 1960s and 1970s. And these guys grew up as stunted children. So the problem now is the ability to comprehend, some people have argued, has been limited. And now at the moment, 1 in 3, a big problem. Anemia, 53%. These are very difficult statistics to stomach. But you look at on the other hand, so undernutrition on the other hand, people are starving, there's stunting, there's anemia. But on the other hand, there are excesses. 24% of women and 9% of men overweight and obese. You and me are in problems. Me, I'm already overweight, I'm struggling. It's a battle day and night. But the angle is we could be overweight and obese because of what happened in early childhood. If in early childhood you're exposed to less, you struggle to go to school, walked many miles to go to school and etc. And by God's grace, you made it. And now there's a compensation happening that you are exposed to less and now you're exposed to abundance. Then also you have problems of overweight, what we call metabolic adaptation. You adapt over time to less, but when you overwhelm the body with excess in adulthood, then you become rapidly overweight and obese. And 33% of deaths among adults have been attributed to this problem. So there's a crisis. This is the trend of the undernourishment. Our children under 5 years, stunting has been slowly reducing. You see 1988, 48%. So many of our parents were stunted actually. And maybe that affected them in a number of ways. But that aside, look at this in terms of the regions. Where do you come from? I come from Kigezi. You can't believe it. On the right, stunting is at 30.7. On our left, children who cannot eat 3 meals a day. Can you imagine? A child should eat about 5 meals a day. Even you an adult, 3 meals is a bit small. But a child has a small stomach that once they eat, they get hungry very fast. So they need to eat about 2 to 3 hours. But if you use 3 meals a day for the child, many parts of Uganda are not having children getting 3 meals a day. Look at Karamoja, look at Acholi, big numbers, the Reds. Even in Kigezi, where I come from, 41% of the children are not getting 3 meals a day. Can you imagine? That's painful, in fact. But look at the stunting on your right. It shows you the Toro has high level of stunting. Bunyoro, above 30s. Again, statistics which are really disturbing. And we always say, yes, we're living in Uganda, but can you imagine, Uganda is among the high malnutrition burdened countries. When you go to the world there, and you say countries under nourishment, Uganda stands out among the 20 or 30. So it's not a rosy picture, as you can see. And the problem here is with feeding. After breastfeeding, there's a problem. When we begin to introduce other foods, you see food safety constraints affecting our children. The malnutrition begins to rise in children at about 8 to 18 months old. So if you have a child above 6 months, be very careful, because this is the time when malnutrition begins to set in. Okay, NCDs, I've talked about it. It's a big problem. 33% total deaths in Uganda linked to that. The story even it could be worse. These are statistics which are very old, of 2016. We have no data at the moment on the current status of NCDs. There are so many that we haven't done a thorough study on them. But the study we have of 2016 is saying 33% among adults. And here is also trying to portray the situation countrywide. There are some districts which are doing badly. Out of the 33% overweight and obese, we can see some districts like if we see that obesity in purplish and overweight, you see again the numbers are bigger in the urban areas, and the more richer the regions, the more we see the problem. So Uganda, as someone has said, as we move out of poverty, then also we're moving into non-communicable diseases linked to diet and etc. And we shall not achieve our targets of SDGs as a country. Why? Because SDG 2 specifically, not all SDGs, but SDG 2 on nutrition, on zero hunger and nutrition, because stunting is still a problem, anemia is still a problem, and our breastfeeding indicators are not any good, because more than half of our children, we have to improve exclusive breastfeeding to more than 90%, and we're at 60%, and we may not reach there. But other targets around overweight in children, we may achieve. So these factors, or if we want to reduce these factors, which are now a problem for adults, please try to, as much as possible, avoid those dangers at the root there, the lifestyle issues and the diet, and try to go more for the outcomes in terms of having better choices, so as to minimize these problems of cancer, diabetes, and etc. Recent study by the Ministry of Health, and I think I'm winding up in 2 slides, showed very difficult findings. I was part of the lead of this study. It's being published anytime soon. But you can see that deep fried foods were very common in public institutions. Fresh foods were less considered. Beverages, packed beverages, the yellow bar, everywhere you go to any public institution, Coca-Cola, all these things are there, yet they're unhealthy. And these are adults, some are not even aware. So deep fried and carbonated, very common, very unhealthy, yet very common in our public institutions. Here, as I wind up, prepared by qualified staff. Yes, Jonathan, sorry, I think I have to move. Meals by qualified personnel, many did provide qualified personnel, so many don't have the awareness. Mandatory training of food handlers is not happening in many facilities across the country. So there's a problem also. So as I wind down the emerging issues, there's a apparent indication that unhealthy foods and practices are evenly distributed across Uganda. The vast of stakeholders in the environment, but unhealthy choices have increased, and also we have inadequate considerations, both in terms of regulatory and enforcement measures. In fact, Kabanda now has become the government, because he talks a lot around these things, more than the government people themselves. And in conclusion, therefore, my last slide, ladies and gentlemen, is that across the country, the food environment seems to be proliferated. Everywhere you go, there's deep frying. Everywhere you go, processing, there are rudimentary processors who are adding sugar to all these funny drinks and etc. And really, there's a problem. And there's demand for them. Why? Because people don't know the risk. There's out of demand. So the lawyers have to come in to curtail demand by showing the legal risks and even come with the litigation. Inadequate deployment of expertise, inadequate coordination. The institutional, legal, and policy regime have not addressed the problem. And the human rights dimension are really not yet to the desired level of perhaps advocacy or noise. There are very few people talking about the legal dimensions of unhealthy foods, the physical inactivity, all the land, even the paving of the road. There's no lane for jogging or cycling a bicycle. Yet, actually, this is what we're supposed to be promoting. Where can I cycle my bicycle? So that I come with it and I cycle. I cannot risk, because the environment does not provide for that. Ladies and gentlemen, sorry I took a lot of your time. My apologies, but I thank you very much for listening to me. And over to you, Bwana Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I am very grateful for this insightful discussion. I want to let you know that whenever I get in touch with you and we speak about this, I surely change a thing or two on how to see and deal with my choices in dietary issues. And I'm also optimistic that colleagues on the call have gotten a rich, insightful on this discussion. And I'm seeing colleagues asking for a presentation. We are going to share the presentation. And when you look at these discussions on issues to do with good nutrition, where doctor has specified that good nutrition is not for all, I mean, good nutrition is not only about food availability. So this discussion go to us and we reflect back which people have we left home and how are they feeding. It may not be you here on the call, but the people at home, the people that you look after wherever you are. So we need to take keen attention. He has highlighted on the dietary-related diseases. When you go to the Cancer Institute, the statistics are worrying, and the increase in patient intake at the Cancer Institute, this is very, very challenging. However, we need to look forward to having a change in mindset and how we as lawyers change the food governance in Uganda. At this particular time, allow me to invite Director Ruth Sechindi. She will take us through in issues to do with understanding the legality of the right to adequate food and the normative content, understanding the aspect of Dr. Peter, and then we put it in the aspect of the law. This is what we are going now to look at. I also call again upon the participants to use the Q&A. Kindly utilize it such that we can pick on these questions, and the facilitators will answer and respond to them. After Director Ruth, we are going to go into a mini plenary where we shall have 2 or 3 questions coming in, and the facilitators will respond as then we go to the other session. Thank you so much. You are welcome, Director Ruth.
Thank you so much. I greet you all. I hope this finds you well. I have shared my screen, and I'm wondering whether you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it very well.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the right to adequate food and the legal framework that entails this right. And I'm saying that the right to food guarantees the right of people to food in a quality and quantity that is sufficient to satisfy the dietary needs. Dr. Lukundo has just been talking about this, the quality and quantity. And this quality and quantity should be free from adverse substances and should be within the acceptable norms of society. We can't talk about adequate food when in a particular community, your customs and laws or your culture does not allow that. So we cannot force, for example, the Muslims to eat pork. You cannot take your senene to certain persons and you call it food. They will not call it food. When we deal with Karamoja, the way we deal with food in the people of Karamoja is different. So when we are talking about the right to adequate food, we look at the quality, the quantity, the dietary needs, and it should be free of adverse substances, and it has to be acceptable in a particular society. So to sum it up, the right to adequate food encompasses food security and food safety. And here food safety implies that food should be free of adverse substances, whether from adulteration or from poor environmental or hygiene. And then food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient food. So there should be safe and nutrition, and this means that their dietary needs should be able to meet a healthy lifestyle. Now, oh, sorry, my thing has frozen. So when we look at the scope of the right to adequate food, the right to be free from hunger is the minimum essential level of the right to adequate food. And it implies that food has to be available. There should be, when we're talking about human rights and the right to food, we look at the availability, accessibility, and acceptability. So in regard to availability, we have to ensure that there is sufficient quality, that people are able to access food and that the food is available. Can you afford it? Then accessibility, it means that the ways of accessing food should not be interfered with, whether by the state. For example, if your land is taken away and this person lives off the land, that's where they till their food. Then if that land is taken away, the issue of accessibility is affected. Then, and when we go back to availability, people should be able to provide for themselves food. And in the process, in the event that they cannot adequately provide for themselves that food, for example, if there's famine in Karamoja and people cannot access food, then it's a requirement that the state should be able to provide that food. Then when we talk about accessibility, it goes into economic accessibility and physical accessibility. Economic accessibility means that these people should have maybe employment and they should be able to buy food at a low cost. And then the physical accessibility means that adequate food must be available, whether in the markets for vulnerable persons, and they can be able to physically touch that food. Now, when we talk about the right to adequate food in Uganda and in the world over, the primary duty bearer is the state, and that is government. The state is required internationally to make sure that they have an obligation to respect the right to food. They should be the state should protect the right to food. The state should promote the right to food and should fulfill the right to food. And what does this mean? Respect means there should be no interference in people accessing food. It means that people should be able to access their food, and the state does not ensures that there is no war, there is peace for people to get their own food. The protection of the right to food means they have to put, the state or government has to put in place laws and mechanisms within which are able to protect people in accessing food. This means that don't bring dangerous chemicals. Laws that entail that the state has to, or government, people are able to access their food through having in place enabling legislation that protect the people in accessing food. And the promotion of the right to food requires government to make people aware of what food to take, what they shouldn't take, and also to make sure that people know how to protect themselves from taking in dangerous food. Then the obligation to fulfill means government facilitating people to give people seeds, make sure that you put irrigation methods in place for people to be able to get food or plant crops. In the event that there's famine, there's war, ensure that OPM takes food directly to the people. That's what fulfillment means. But in all this, government has to ensure that there is no discrimination, whether in regard to ethnicity, geographical location, religion, sex, or social status. So the obligation to spend and spread the minimum available resources on government. Government has to always have minimum available resources to ensure that people are able to access the right to food. So when we look at the legal framework, then Uganda plays its international obligation by one, providing for the legal framework. And when we look at the constitution under the different objectives, whether 22 or 14, we look at we see that these national objectives and directive principles on state policy provides that the state shall ensure that Ugandans have food and nutrition. And Uganda has also ratified a number of international instruments, including the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which requires state parties to ensure that the people of Uganda are adequately fed and people do not die of hunger. We have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which Uganda has ratified. We have the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and these have been ratified by Uganda. And all these instruments require the government of Uganda to ensure that the people of Uganda are protected from hunger and malnutrition. And because of this, government enacted laws to comply with these international human rights standards and mechanisms. We have the Food and Drug Act. Unfortunately, this is a very ancient act whose provisions do not meet the modern times. It's a 1959 law. We have the Agriculture Chemicals Control Act, that's of 2006. We have the Uganda National Bureau of Standards, which is supposed to check the quality of food on our markets, to check whether the fruits and vegetables in the markets are adulterated, whether they have toxic chemicals, to check the water that we take, is it safe? We have the External Trade Act that also checks the quality of food or food that we export. Uganda has also put in place a number of policies that are supposed to protect food and nutrition. And we have the Uganda Food and Nutrition Policy. We have the National Health Policy and National Grain Policy. We have the National Standard and Quality Policy. We have the National Agriculture Policy. We have the Animal Feeds Policy. So, and many others, as you can see on the screen. So this means that government is trying to come up with very many policies in regard to food and nutrition, in regard to people being able to engage in agriculture, to be able to provide for themselves food. It has put in place the Uganda Nutrition Action Plan. The question is, are these policies working? So as a commission, as the national human rights institution, the watchdog of human rights in the country, we monitor the different rights. And when it comes to the right to food, we look at the legal framework, we look at the the policy framework, we look at the budgetary allocations, we look at whether the food is available, whether it's accessible, whether it's acceptable, whether the quality is good. We look at who are the duty bearers. We look at whether there's jurisprudence in regard to food, and then we look at the enforcement. And our findings are this. In 2018, when we first monitored the quality of food in Uganda, we noted that in Uganda, any person, you and I, or any person off the street is allowed to sell food. This food is in the markets, it's on the streets, it's on the highways, it's in the rollets so that you find full of dust, it's in the grocery stores, it's in supermarkets, it's at social events, and all this, anyone is allowed to sell food with or without a license. We found that despite this, which is good for Ugandans to invest, and it's good for the economy. However, we found that food in Uganda, especially on the streets, we found, and also the food that we sell, we find that a lot of food is adulterated and contaminated in most parts of the country. We found that the Rolex sometimes is full of, because we use experts to test the food, and the Rolex and the yams that they sell in the markets, we found that the maize is full of aflatoxins, the groundnuts that we take, you see that grayish mold, that is aflatoxin. It is risky to cancer, it causes cancer. We found that the maize, even though the maize is molding, that mold is aflatoxin, it causes cancer, and the farmers do not care. So we found a lot of adulteration and contamination when it comes to food. Then cases of food contamination include also chlorine in water, microbial contamination in beverages and soft drinks. We found drug residues. We found formalin. We found a lot of pesticides on fruits, to an extent that when farmers take, for example, tomatoes to the markets, they still bring pesticides to spray the vegetables. So you see a white substance or greenish substance just to preserve these fruits. And the children pick tomatoes and just eat them. We found that coffee is mixed with husks. And we found that a number of issues are happening to the food, the fruits that we pick from our markets and communities. Unfortunately, contamination is real. We found chemicals in food products, and we noted that most farmers misuse pesticides. There's a lot of misuse of pesticides. They are illiterate. Many are illiterate, not all of them, but they do not know how to use pesticides, which has put many Ugandans in danger, because you know you can limit any other products, but you cannot limit food, because it's a requirement for the body. So everyone has to consume food, but how safe is the food that you take in? When we don't care, we all go to I don't know, container village, and anyone can pick any drug, anyone can pick any pesticide, and they use it, whether they know how to use it or not. We know that there's contamination during transportation. The fruits, the vegetables, they step on them, they sit on them, they don't mind what they mix the fruit with, the packaging is all wrong, and during transportation on trucks, on pickups, the food continues to be contaminated, to an extent that when farmers harvest, for example, tomatoes, potatoes, they take them to swamps sometimes that have sewage, and they clean or they wash these fruits and vegetables in the sewage or in dirty swamps. So as such, many fruits, many foods on our markets continue to be contaminated. We noted contamination of food sold on the streets on a daily in every town that we are, in every city. We note that the food is exposed with a lot of dust, germs all day, poor hygiene, and the councils, the districts, sometimes this is too much for them or they do not know. We noted when it came to beef, we noted that there's a lot of formalin. Formalin is what we use when we are preserving dead bodies. We noted that you go to a stall and there's no fly. So now for me, I've resorted that when I go to a butcher, I want to see a fly. If I don't see a fly, I am not sure whether that beef doesn't have formalin or not. Because formalin, even the insects know that this is dangerous. They keep away. So these chemicals are very dangerous and have affected Ugandans, and we continue to see cancer, and yet very few cases ever go to court. Now, these are some of that was formalin that we found in Nakasero market. That was a trader. When they checked behind, they found him with those little bottles, and all they do is to spray that substance on the meat. And this is what I'm telling you in the side of the tomatoes. Tomatoes are full of pesticides. But these pesticides are also used by farmers to preserve the fruit and vegetable on the market. The other findings we noted is that fishermen continue to use poison to catch fish. And this is really rather being lazy. We noted that fishermen go on the lakes, and instead of casting their nets, they go around a particular area and pour poison. And then every living thing beneath that water dies, and then the fish just comes afloat, which is really dangerous. So Uganda Bureau of Standards has to come in. I don't know, but who's on the lake? And how many lakes and rivers do we have? So we also noted that dairy farmers continue to milk or even slaughter cows that are sick or dead. And many times these cows have been already, that you've been injecting them with harmful or medicine, and the cow dies or passes. The farmers do not just bury this animal. They slaughter the animal and it ends up on the market. Now, what does that do? We, the consumers, end up consuming meat that has, or beef that has chemicals. And this has also contributed to the diseases that we see. We have noticed that the processed foods on our supermarkets, for those who have traveled abroad, you will find that there's a section of food that is about to expire in 3 or 6 months. In Uganda, you don't find such a thing. You ask yourself, where does the expired food go? We found that the owners of the supermarkets have just learned a way of changing the expiry dates on the expiry date for the shelf line of these commodities. So many Ugandans never bother to know the ingredients. They never look at the expiry dates of these processed foods, and we continue to buy this food. And then when it comes to preservation, sweeteners, and artificial coloring in food, we noted that our manufacturers, even the food we import, still use preservatives such as those words and salt in the process of preserving food. And this also may affect the body. Then when it comes to grain, grain is a challenge for us, because as Ugandans, every family usually eats posho. Every family usually eats maybe groundnuts. Every family usually eats millet or, kalo. And what happens? These grains, many times when they mold, that mold those are aflatoxins. They're very dangerous to the body. Groundnuts, maize, millet, peas, and yet we continue to consume them, and the farmers don't bother to pick out the mold, the moldy or spoil, but they just want to have a bounty sale, and it continues to affect people. When it came to Karamoja last year, I think the media was awash with the food insecurity and the long dry spell in Karamoja. And what we noted that while the biggest part of the country was having rains and having plenty, our people in Karamoja, 41% of the people of Karamoja were facing high levels of food insecurity, which is really a challenge for a country that we call the Pearl of Africa. And many people have bountifuls of food. We continue to see that we in this day and age continue to lose fellow Ugandans due to lack of food, due to hunger. We noticed that we got records from the districts, and Kabong had 252 deaths, people dying because of lack of food. When we have plentiful and others are dying of obesity, we are having a particular part of the country that has 225 deaths. And even these numbers are many times not reported. In Napak, we had 188 deaths, people who died due to lack of food or due to hunger. In Moroto, we had 35, and in Kotido, we had 1,676 deaths. That is high, very, very high numbers of people dying due to lack of food, when the other parts of the country are having plenty. Now, the causes of famine in Karamoja, and these are, I should say, endemic. We know that every 3 years or 2 years, there will be long dry spells in Karamoja. Right now, they are having rains, but why then don't we plan? I know that the ministry or the first lady, when she was in Ministry of Karamoja Affairs, she tried. They built roads and they did irrigation, but this consistent issue of hunger in Karamoja, as a country, we have to address it. We note that there's weather variability and erratic rains in Karamoja. They are never consistent. There is low crop rates. Sometimes this has affected people from, adequately going out there to plant crops. There's delays in response of early warning. We should have an early warning system. The Uganda Meteorological Authority on 21st February 2022 gave a detailed forecast about the drought that was coming. Unfortunately, nothing was done until people started dying, and then we all went into overdrive, trying to rescue or salvage the situation by sending teams to take food. But even that food, it was stolen by some people in Kampala. How heartless can we be? Anyway, we also noted that still in Karamoja, they have issues of destruction of food by buffaloes, elephants, because of the Kidepo National Park. The levels of poverty are high. There's lack of low employment or none. And so the likelihood of people going hungry, because if you have money, you don't need a garden. That food, your money will buy you food. And because of lack of food, there's also alcoholism. So they resort to taking alcohol that they get from neighboring districts, and also eating those residues from Kwete or Malwa. Then the land degradation, climate changes has heavily impacted Karamoja. Then in 2020 and 2021, we also noted that the COVID situation affected many people. We note that now I'm just going through the issues of Uganda in regard to issues of adequate food. When it came to, we noted that 2019, 2018, 2020, when it came to schools, parents still send their children because of poverty. They still send their children to school without food, and the schools are also not providing food. And when the Ministry of Education came in to send food, they are giving how much? 1,000 per child. The schools are saying we cannot live off this. And so you're lucky to get a cup of porridge with a full cup of tampeco porridge. So the situation is really there. Many children are dropping out, or their education is affected due to lack of food. When it comes to health, we note that the lifestyle choices and lack of food has affected our health. Now, when I go back to the legal framework and the challenges that we have in regard to our laws, we note that there's an absence of specific legislation now. Everything that pertains a human being in Uganda has been legislated upon. However, one of the most important variables in human life is food. Despite this, we do not have a specific legislation on the right to adequate food. Rather, we have the Food and Drug Act of 1959. However, this Food and Drug Act, Uganda has only operationalized the drug part, the drugs. So we legislate and we are implementing the drug part, where we look at the quality of drugs, the availability of drugs, the standard of distributing drugs. But when it comes to food, we have not implemented this part. And there's no specific legislation on food. So there's inadequate provisions on the food safety and the regulatory framework. So the drug component has been operationalized, but issues of food have not. When it comes to the policy framework, we know that we have come up with many frameworks that plan for modernization of agriculture. We have PDM, the Food and Nutrition Policy. We have the Poverty Eradication Plan, and many others. However, despite all these plans, the Food and Nutrition Policy is outdated. It's 2003. We have been calling for the amendment. Now, in place, we have the monitoring and oversight institution is the National Bureau of Standards, the Ministry of Trade, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Gender. All these ministries have a component on the right to food. However, we do not have a specific institution that addresses food. Who is in charge? When there's famine in Karamoja, who's in charge? So we send OPM because of disaster. What if we did not call that a disaster? So we have the National Bureau of Standards that is understaffed, adequately paid. They have no money. They don't even have, they're overwhelmed because this Uganda Bureau of Standards is the one that reviews your iron sheets, is the one that's supposed to check the quality of cement, is the one supposed to check all imported goods, is the one that checks your toothpaste and shoes and everything. When we contacted them, they said, we don't have the expertise to check the quality of food, and food is everywhere. We don't even know the traders in food because everyone trades in food. We don't even have the manpower to do this. So then that means that the institutions responsible to check the quality of the food on our markets are not there. So even though the Uganda National Bureau of Standards is supposed to do this work, little has been done or none. And as I've said, only the drug component is considered. And then OPM only limits issues of food to disaster. The Ministry of Health only deals with nutrition. So you see that we do things in piecemeal when it comes to monitoring adequate food. So as I'm concluding, I'm saying we have made recommendations that food should be given priority on the national agenda. We are calling for the amendment of the Food and Nutrition Policy and the Food and Nutrition Act. We are saying that we should eradicate poverty because if people are poor, they cannot access food. And if the people are hungry, they'll attack the poor. So the rich cannot sleep when the poor are awake and hungry. Every time these people, these young boys, or even old men and women are on the streets and they are hungry, the way to get themselves out of hunger is to steal. So whether we build long fences around our homes, you and I, you who consider yourself rich, you do not sleep every time the dog barks at home, you are awake. The rich cannot sleep when the poor are awake and hungry. So we have to address issues of unemployment. Climate change is real. The weather patterns have changed. Farmers don't know when to plant or when not to plant. We need to implement these laws and policies. Even the few that we have, we are not implementing them. And we need national food reserves and community silos. Back in the days, our forefathers had silos. Who has seen a silo in the recent years? When Uganda or when Karamoja was hit by famine last year, we did not have a food reserve. We didn't have food reserves, and yet we produce a lot of grains, maize, groundnuts, millet, peas, and all those foods that we can put and preserve. We do not have national food reserves. We had them in ginger. They are rotting away and wasting away. Can we rethink as a country on the way we deal with ensuring that no one is left to go hungry in this day and age? And every time we say, oh, we're getting people out of poverty, and even though we're talking about food, I'm saying every time you think that your problem, the only way of solving every problem is a nail, then all you do is to use a hammer. So you tend to see all your problems as a nail when the only tool you have is a hammer. So let us use many strategies, legislation, interventions, poverty eradication, and awareness for us to address the issue of lack of adequate food, because it is a multi-pronged. We need a multi-pronged approach, and we need many strategies to be able to address the issue of food and malnutrition. So, however, the situation is all not gloomy. Laws and policies have to be implemented and new strategies identified to suit the ever-changing context in the right to food. So we should regroup the cooperatives like we had back in the days. We need to strategize and ensure that there is coordination. If the right to food is cross-cutting against between agriculture, fisheries, OPM, and all these ministries and agencies, there is need for better coordination and harmonization of operations. We need to target rights so that we look at who are the most at risk populations. We need to have strong voices to inform the disparate leadership about the right to food so that they can be able to help the people. And we need accessible justice where we use legislation and we ensure accountability for our leaders. I hope you're still awake. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Director Ruth. I'm very sure that we are all awake to this discussion. It's been insightful, and bearing in mind that we want to change the fronts on promoting this right and healthy diets and the right to food in general. You've highlighted a number of issues in the report, and we want to applaud the work that is done by the Commission. This is research that we need to put into effect. And looking at how tomatoes are sprayed in, and also sprayed from the garden, sprayed in the market, whereby people just want to go and pick those that have whitish substance with little knowledge that this is a cancerous disease, a cancerous chemical on it. So we want to create this more awareness. And you have also given us overwhelming statistics that anyone could listen in and get worried that, okay, where are we going if these issues are prevalent in Uganda? And also we need to know that how then should we use the law, trigger ourselves as lawyers to bring these issues on board under litigation and as well as in policy reform. At this time, I also believe that we have colleagues on the call who have a few or one or two questions that they want to bring out to the two panelists that have, the few facilitators that have taken us through a discussion. Kindly prepare yourselves and you unmute and ask a question. However, allow me to highlight a few issues that have been put in the chat. We're saying very insightful presentation. I hope we shall get the presentations. This will be provided. And also from Esther Akulo, ask indeed a narrow perspective on nutrition, and I'm eager to learn even more now. Yeah, thank you so much, Esther. We have Luvega saying that the challenge is that unhealthy food is so tasty. I think at this time, Dr. Peter Wheeler will have to bring that to harmony, whether the tasty food is unhealthy. And also we need to discern the two on that, and the colleagues will get more of this from Doctor. Thank you so much. Thank you, Doctor, for the informative discussion from Fiona. Then we have Kamoga saying adequacy of food processed or otherwise is mainly commanded by the demand and supply curve. I think we also need to, the facilitators need to respond to this point, whether demand, the processed food processing is commanded by the demand and supply curve, and why? And if yes, what should be done best to overcome this? Alice saying that eye-opening discussion. We have Ambayo saying that elaborate presentation. Ronald saying that very timely area of discussion and consideration. Pamela is thanking the team, and also Councillor David Kavanda thanking Director Ruth. And we have Esther Akulo saying, thank you, Ms. Sekindi, for the insightful presentation. The Departments of Legislative Services, Parliament of Uganda has instructions to draft the Food and Nutrition Bill. We pray for support of the people on this forum. I think Director Ruth will come back to this. And also we have Samuel saying, thank you, Ruth, for the presentation. The issues you discussed, e.g. elimination of hunger and poverty, eradication, etc., are hinged on sustainable development goals as a country. What strategies and progress have we made to achieve SDGs in relation to the topic of the day? Also, what impact have the many regulations made on the quality and quantity of food in reality or on the ground? Director Ruth will have to respond to us on that apartment issue. In the Q&A, we have Martha Isabella saying some information. In 2022, the cabinet decided to remove the food component from the mandate of the NDA, and there was a proposed law under NDA which included components of food. Currently, MAIF has been given the obligation to come up with a law on food safety and food security. This will be the National Agricultural Input and the Food Authority Bill. Thanks. Signing off, Martha. With that, I think we are going to have one or two colleagues asking questions to the facilitators as we wait for the facilitators to respond to these discussions. Yes. The team from ULS, you could kindly give us help on if our colleagues can raise two questions before we proceed to the response from the facilitators, and then after we shall go into the other discussion. I think we have not got colleagues raising up issues. I call upon the panelists to respond to the points that have been raised in the chat box. Thank you so much. I think we shall start with Dr. Peter, and then we shall have Director Ruth coming up to respond to the subsequent questions. Thank you so much. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you so much, Bwana Jonathan and colleagues for raising some comments. I followed most of them in the chat, and indeed I should say that there are quite a number of them and very informative, as indicated. The key ones I tried to gather was around issues of adequacy. I had one at least on that, and also pitching in, perhaps Dr. Sechindi will add on the new direction that the government is taking with regard to the new law which is proposed on food and animal, I think, food and animal safety, as well as veterinary drugs. To start us off, the issue of adequacy and quality, whether processing also affects it. One is that adequacy, as indicated, we are looking at mainly about 3 to 5 parameters. Adequacy in terms of the nutrients, like we saw, nutrient adequacy. We also look at adequacy in terms of whether or not it is safe for human consumption. There's another angle of adequacy which we commonly use, which is diversity, in terms of how have you integrated foods from different groups into your diet. And then, of course, another dimension of adequacy, like we said, which increasingly is becoming an issue of concern, is the sustainability element. Does it have harmful agents in it, or was its production or its processing in accordance to acceptable or desirable norms and processes? And that brings me to the other question, which was asked around whether processing itself is an affront to really safe and healthy foods. We are not saying that processing is a bad thing per se. I think processing is a good thing. At times it prolongs food in terms of preservation. Processing also adds some value sometimes, because a food which was deficient may be made to have more nutrients through fortification and other means. But also processing may remove some harmful agents like the bacteria and others, making food more safe. So that is the positive side of processing. But the challenge with it, and perhaps the negative side, is that processing also tends to introduce other compounds to the food. As we try to prolong life of food, we bring in a chemical, sodium benzoate or ETC. As we try to improve the nutritional quality of food in processing in terms of fortification, adding a nutrient, we add some other compounds, stabilizers and etc. And all these compounds, yes, they have the positive angle to them, but also they have the negative side. For example, all processed foods must have some sodium in them, and some must have some sugar to try and either improve the taste or reduce on the water activity or the level of water in the product. And these additions in terms of salt or sugar are negative in terms of the consequence when you take them too much. And the problem is that you may think that sugar is the process, is in the tea that we add or whatever, but the amount added during processing is often invisible and usually also in heavy amounts. So cumulatively, as you take many processed foods, so you took a soda for lunch, in the evening, or even a bottle of water, it has some sodium in it. Then you are taking a fried food, it has something in it. Then you are taking another packed juice, it has something in it. So cumulatively, you find you have really accumulated a lot of sodium and a lot of sugars, and those have negative consequences on our health. So we are saying that as much as possible, yes, even if processed foods are hardly difficult to avoid, can we minimize and reduce them and go for wholesome foods? If you can get juice and do it at your home, well and good, then you don't need the soda. If you can have your water into your bottle, that is good, because the more we procure and the more we survive on these foods, the more we're at a risk of taking more. And there was even a discussion around omega-3 at some point. For example, people used to take these tablets, omega-3 is good for the heart and etc. And now the story has changed, it's negative. It's not good for the heart. Why? Because omega-3, we get it. You're taking a supplement, then you're complementing it with food from the diet. I mean, nutrients from ordinary food. So at the end of the day, the omega-3 becomes too much and then it's converted into fat. So then it becomes negative. So what should have been a positive benefit ends up cumulatively creating a negative consequence. Now, the other question, therefore, how do we move on that angle in terms of regulation? The regulations we are pushing for, and really the regime we're trying to advance, is one of responsible processing, one of responsible marketing and responsible consumption, or sustainable consumption, sustainable processing, and sustainable behaviors. Why? Because really, if we are processing, is the processor bearing in mind that he or she should not add too much of the negative of the component that will cause negative health? Is he following the rules and regulations of processing, the good manufacturing practices? Many are not. Many are not even labeling, because we need information about what is in the product. But you go to many products, the labels are hardly seen, or even the information is hardly provided. And that's why I think Kwabanda will be coming in for front of the pack labeling. The traffic light approach, it's now in many countries of the world, where if they say sodium and the sodium is in high levels, we put a red there, so that people can begin to look at even colors of the compounds in the food on the label and they get worried about it. So if it's a red, I know there's high sodium, so I'm worried. If it's a green, I know it's a low level. If it's yellow, it's moderate. So I begin now to plan my consumption based on the risk factors in the commodity. So we are pushing for those good labeling laws, but we are yet to have them. Enforcement is still a problem, and we still have many products on the market, which you and me are accessing, which have not met the standards. Yes, the ministry, government has now come forward with a new proposal for the food and the animal.
Doctor.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know, was that, or is time up? What I was trying to say, Jonathan.
I was saying that you have a minute.
Okay, just in a minute to wind up. Why there's a contradiction now is that UNBS was doing well on processed foods, but the biggest problem of food safety is not on the processed foods, it's on the foods which are going to our markets here in Kalerwe, in Katwe where we are, and etc. Those markets, who's regulating quality and safety? Who's looking at agrochemicals going to milk, or the formalin that my sister Ruth Sechindi was talking about? Oftentimes, those should be regulated on the farm level and during transportation and distribution. But we see UNBS is more at the supermarket level, at the factory level, but no one is going to the markets. No one is going to the farms where these things are being intoxicated. No one is looking at the water being used in terms of preparing the juices that we take and etc. So that's why there's a feeling now by government that if the Ministry of Agriculture can regulate the foods which are coming to the markets, the wholesome fresh foods, and the agrochemicals, veterinary drugs, and etc. While the UNBS can concentrate more on the processed, high-end industrial foods, where the standards can be enforced at that level. So there's that feeling that no one is regulating food safety and quality at the district level, at the market here where we are buying our foods, or even at the garden level where we are producing. No one is there to watch. whether we're adding very harmful chemicals to these foods at production level. And that's why the angle of MAIF comes in. So sorry, Jonathan, I took a lot of time. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I think it is very amazing to listen to you and as you distill these particular points. And I hope that the answers from colleagues have been responded to fully. Let us now go to Director Ruth to give us her insights on the questions that have been put up in the chat to do with the draft food and nutrition bill, and also her insights on what impact have the many regulations made on the quality and quantity of food in reality or on the ground. Those are issues, and also there is the last one on the authority. Director Ruth, kindly take the floor.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, thank you so much, the listeners and those who contributed. I'll first go for the Food and Nutrition Act, because it's an act that we are calling for repeal and amendment. Yes, my sister, you're right when you said Cabinet removed the drug component from the Food and Nutrition Act. And that is why I said that actually the regulation in regard to the drug is what was focused on, but not the one of food. And yet we still have a Food and Nutrition Act. So this should be repealed or amended to have a Food and Nutrition Act. So, MIFA has said, well, for the longest time, MIFA has been in the process of drafting this legislation. So I'm happy that Parliament is also coming on board to come up with a draft. In fact, we had a conference sometime early this year, and we were saying, can we draft the law ourselves if no one is willing to do this? Because the issue of food and how dangerous our food, the food on the market is still a matter of concern. The fact that we still have parts of Ugandans going hungry, we still have stunted children, despite the fact that we call ourselves the Pearl of Africa, is a challenge. When you go to Mulago, the Cancer Institute is growing by the day, and we have invested as a country money to build bigger structures because we anticipate that more people will end up there. It means that no one is safe, and the risk is looming. Because even though you leave the processed foods and you focus on the fresh foods that we have on our markets, which is plentiful, how safe is this food? How safe are you sure that you're not taking in sodium, you're not taking in formalin, you're not taking in all these drugs that are injected in chicken and in beef before these animals are slaughtered and put on the market? And that is why we need a legislation, but also an institution that is able to control or check the quality of the food in our market in every district, whether it's district level. And of the many regulations, as I indicated, there are many regulations. The regulations on animals, the regulations on crops. We have a seed act and all that. Now, even though we have these regulations and policies, unfortunately, they're not being implemented. We have them on paper, as usual. Uganda comes up with beautiful legislation and policies, but we never implement them. And that is why we're saying that even though we are calling for the Food and Nutrition Act, it should not be an end in itself. We need implementation of this legislation in the event that we come up with a legislation. So I think that was it for me. I wish you a good day and thank you for listening to us.
Thank you so much, Director. Wow. So I really think Esther is asking, may we have a facilitator's phone contacts and email addresses for further engagements? This will be a decision that will be taken by the facilitators, and then we see that we scale further these discussions. However, in all that we do, and also the discussions that we have had, Dr. Lukundo highlighted that food is the center of all discussions. And it is in every angle that we see food in the consumer rights, consumer protections, and everything. We also see food now in intellectual property. And this is coming out in the twist of GMOs. Many of us have had these debates coming up in the East African region now, that we see GMOs are coming up to come in a food system. So how then can we take this discussion further? Before us today, we have Council Silva Kayondo. He's going to take us through in addressing the risk towards achieving the right to food in Uganda, a close reflection on the GMO twist. How do we see and envision our food system in the GMO area that we are now coming up to have discussions on? Council Silva Kayondo, kindly take the floor. Hello, Council Silva. We seem not to hear you. Maybe if other colleagues could kindly confirm. Council Silva, you seem to have an issue on the mic. We seem, yes,
you
now.
hear me now?
Yeah, now we hear you.
Okay, so I think maybe it's just the headset.
Yes.
Do you hear me now?
We do hear you very well.
Okay, good. Sorry. Yeah, so I hope it's clear now. So I was asked to speak maybe something briefly about GMOs. And this, I think, culminates a bit into until from maybe some of the work we've been doing with Mr. Kabanda and a few other colleagues within the seed environment. So maybe a big chunk of the discussion has been had on the food and how important it is to our ecosystems, both from a nutritional, a technical point of view, but also now from a legal view. So I'll start from the very beginning. So what are GMOs? So GMOs are animals, plants, or microbes whose DNA has been altered using genetic engineering techniques. So these genetic engineering techniques might include things like gene cloning or gene designing, where you transform and create new plants, new animals, etc., except human beings. So you cannot say you've done a GMO of a human being, but for food, plants, animals, etc. Now, of course, with every research, there are always multiple views and things like that. Pro-GMO lobby say, look, this is good for research and involvement of new food species. It's good for food security. They'll say, look, we have these improved breeds that are more resilient for environments, that are more resilient or high yielding or more tolerant of certain pests and diseases and things like that. Of course, there are also people who are anti-GMO activities. They'll say, look, these have adverse effects on public health. They have adverse effects on the environment. They threaten food security in the sense that traditional seeds will be lost and all of us will become sort of tied to food seed companies. So these GMOs are produced by companies of which you have to go and buy. It's no longer the old traditional breeds of ours where you could keep to replant for the next season. So, and that's where all these IP arguments come in. Say like, look, who has maybe the patents or the plant, the variety protection rights over these new seeds, and if farmers abuse those rights, can the seed companies or the GMO companies take them on, etc. So you have a bit of the big companies in this sector, and some of those include a giant company called Monsanto, very active in Europe, maybe also in Canada, but also very active coming into Africa. So you have also other companies like Bayer and things like that. So from really an overview of that, that's where we are. Now, in Uganda, we've had a few of these trials happening in Naro and also at Namlonge at the National Crops Resources Research Institute, where you've had some new traces of banana, maize, etc. Being experimented. That from a regional perspective, of course, most of our regional countries have had bans in place, except for Kenya. So where most of us did not have regulatory frameworks that were in place. So for Uganda, we've had a series around the genetic engineering bill, the national, which had been preceded by a biosafety and biosecurity bill and things like that. So in Kenya, there was a freeze on GMO activity, but a few years ago, the current President William Ruto convened a cabinet and that ban was lifted, I think, which has resulted in litigation in Kenya and also some efforts in the East Africa Court of Justice, where countries are challenging lifting of that ban or freeze for a large-scale testing of GMO material in Uganda, rather in Kenya. Of course, the argument is both from a nationalistic point of view in the sense of Kenya, but also from a transboundary or cross-border perspective in the sense that with East Africa as a community now, you have what might be permitted in Kenya spilling over into porous borders in Uganda and across other neighbors, where, as we've had, monitoring and enforcement have had challenges. So in Uganda, we have several efforts that are ongoing. We have institutions like the Uganda Biotech and Biosafety Consortium, which is doing some of the research around these activities. Of course, we have the Uganda National Council of Science and Technology, where much of the approval processes for these technologies resides. So, and the opportunity for lawyers in this sector is, of course, massive, right from the policy perspective. So we've had the Uganda National Seed Policy, we've had the Seed and Plants Act. All these talk about some of these new technologies that are being created for seed transformation and enhancement. Of course, there will be the regulatory aspects. We've heard of things around labeling, as Dr. Lukundo submitted, where the non-GMO crops, even in points of sale in distribution in supermarkets and markets, have to be labeled differently from the organic foods and things like that. Of course, the touchy point usually from this aspect is the element of strict liability. Some jurisdictions create strict liability clauses in events of harm arising from GMO, where the GMO companies have to put the bill of remediation expenses and things like that. Of course, with the Uganda's framework, that was proposed at some point, but I do not know where that discussion is at the moment. Of course, there are issues to deal with safety assessments. Largely, this has been through pilot exercises. Before you do mass rollouts, entities sometimes do some trial periods of research. And this has been prevalent in Kenya, and you get, even in Uganda, there are some trial experimentations that are going on. Of course, the other legal issue here is largely traceability in the market, that if you're able to trace GMO product from point of production or from point of garden up to end user. And in case of any challenges, you're able to issue recalls and things like that. So largely that's the legal regulatory side. There is also the transactional side. So for commercial lawyers are interested in this space, there is usually challenges around partnerships and collaboration agreements where these GMO companies or manufacturers will partner maybe with local academic research institutions or local research institutions to do this kind of work. So issues around benefit sharing with communities also usually come in. Of course, the IP issues, usually either transfers of licenses or assignments of rights accrued from these products usually also come up. Then there is also the financing of the actual products. I mean, from acquisition of land to setting up of the production equipment and material. There is the issues of taxation, and sometimes tax holidays or rebates are negotiated depending on how these entities have come into the country. If they come in largely under the ambit of government research, then definitely aspects around tax holidays and incentives come in. So I think I'll stop it at that point and see if there are any specific questions maybe that I could take, given that this is a very broad topic and I don't want to be groping around in darkness around. So Jonathan, I don't know what you would like me to talk about particularly regarding some of the local initiatives that might be happening in this space.
Yes, thank you so much, Councillor Silva. I have one or two questions, but allow me to bring them after the second facilitator, after the last facilitator speaking in this session. That will be Mr. Kavanda David. So we want to intertwine now litigation to see how then can we bring face on food in court. So these are issues we want to bring up. And I know also colleagues on the call will also write their questions in the chat box, which we shall raise up for feedback. Thank you so much, Council. When we talk about food, and some people say, okay, what is that for us? What is in there for food, in food for lawyers? I think the topic has been broadened and it is now getting back to home amongst us as the legal fraternity, and how we can harmonize our practice to do, and also our lifestyles in issues that we look at. We have Councillor David Kavanda. I can say he has built jurisprudence in the right to health and also in the right to food aspects in Uganda, the regional and also the international level. And we want him to take us through on the issue to do with underscoring the role of public interest litigation in shaping the legal and policy environment for Uganda's food system. We are waiting for you, Councillor Kavanda, to see what is in there for us as the litigators, and how do we see and tap into the processes in litigation towards shaping our food system, looking at the discussions we have had way from 9 a.m. to now, which is 7 minutes past 11. Yes, Councillor David Kavanda, kindly take the floor.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Let me share my screen. Hope people can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
I'm very happy to be making this presentation, and I really want to thank Director Rose for the wonderful presentation. My brother, Council Silva Kayondo, thank you so much. And Dr. Peter. I think where you are bringing us from is a very firm foundation for the discussion that I'm going to be taking us through. We have all these challenges, and when you listen to the statistics, they are worrying, they are annoying, and you quickly make a conclusion that there are too many illegalities that are happening in this country. And for me, when you listen, before you start doing this work, you may not understand the magnitude of the work that is ahead of us as lawyers. And I have told people that I work with, and also people in the sector, that maybe the food and agriculture sector is lagging behind, primarily because lawyers have either not been introduced properly to this sector, or lawyers have been biased to think that it is not their sector, so they shouldn't be, engaging in this sector, or they shouldn't be, practicing in this sector. And for me, that one is not only wrong, I should say, but unstrategic, because even if you're a commercial litigating lawyer or a social justice lawyer, the space or the sector of food and agriculture should be your interest for obvious reasons. We know that when you talk about climate change now globally, everyone is talking about climate change. We know that the second biggest contributor to climate change crisis is agriculture, is food and agriculture. If you look at the big industry in poultry and the kind of greenhouse gases that are being produced because of the poultry, because of the meat industry, both in Africa and also globally, this is a huge space in terms of legalities. I was in Cape Town recently, and a very big meat industry is recalling meat. But yes, you are recalling meat off shelves, but people have been eating it. All these are legal, legal issues, culpability issues. It could actually be both in negligence, in criminal law, environmental law, but also in the food law, if we can isolate it as a discipline that we are talking about. But when you look at how lawyers in Uganda look at this particular issue, they look at it as something that doesn't concern them. Away from climate change or environment law, we have the trade law. We all like commercial litigation. Maybe we should now start speaking this language, because lawyers think that the kind of training we have is a training to make money, and see law is a trade. But when it comes to food and agriculture, you cannot disassociate it from trade. Let me demonstrate this further. If you are talking about food and agriculture, would you be surprised if you heard today that Uganda is importing vegetables? Imagine, vegetables. It was in the newspapers yesterday that we have reached a threshold of 68 billion. 68 billion? Who is regulating the trade? Where are the lawyers? Who is benefiting in this trade? On the customs and everything. When you go in the markets, If where you live in Chijarijo, you go to a nearby market for groceries and what, you think that you are picking carrots from a Ugandan farmer, but these carrots are not from a Ugandan farmer. You ask them for garlic, just garlic. It is not Ugandan. Maybe lawyers have left this big trade and money to other players, and this is why we are having a lot of violations, and whoever is violating our food rights, they do it with a lot of impunity, because the eye of a lawyer is completely closed when it comes to the food and agriculture sector. When we are talking about mangoes, vegetables, fruits, some are coming from South Africa, the apples. Who is regulating this trade, and who is, in charge of the laws that are supposed to be into this trade, the contracts, the what, and who? Where do farmers, or where do the traders, the middlemen in the value chain, where do they go? So we want, from our side as social justice lawyers, we really would love to now speak to commercial lawyers, commercial litigators, to understand how deep this business is, because the moment they understand it, then we'll be able to speak the same language and then be able to move together. Now, from climate to the food and the aspect of animal husbandry, the fish, you all know that many people are now farming fish, and those the legal framework around fish. Do you realize how expensive fish is in the country today? Why would a lawyer think that the price of fish doesn't concern them, or they shouldn't be interested in the net importation of concentrates that are used in poultry and also in fish farming? Do we even care or know whether these concentrates are dangerous to human life? Because our existence as a people, our existence, lawyers don't exist in isolation of a bigger community. So we need to be involved, and we are opening up some of these avenues, not like ambulance chasers, but you clearly see that if you put out yourself as a lawyer who understands the poultry business law, then we have too many poultry, businessmen who will be coming to you. I want to give you an example. Yesterday, I was shocked. Our office is in Gayaza, and the border now stage people, and they know that building for lawyers, Yesterday, I got a shock of my life that we were here, and many entered. And when I asked, what are they here for? Said, oh, they come because they've been told this building is the building for lawyers, and they want us to give them legal services. And I told my colleagues, but yes, we are lawyers, but we are not commercial litigators. I'm just demonstrating the issue of when you put out yourself that I know this, or I practice this law, many people will come to you. Many people come to us and they want us to draft maybe agreements. Maybe they are importing inputs. There is now too much equipment, agriculture equipment, very big plantations. For example, palm oil in Kalangala, the coffee, you saw the law on coffee, because coffee is also in the cluster of food. Who is interested? Who is taking lead in this as lawyers? I think I'm here to start. I'm starting with that statement. of, as we speak to the Uganda Law Society, at least the lawyers, I listened to CEO Moses when he made his opening remarks. Yes, you are right. Maybe we need to do a lot of work as the cluster to interest many lawyers to come into the food and agriculture sector. But maybe it starts by, showing lawyers how important this particular sector is and how opportunities, are coming up in this particular sector. When you look at the National Development Plan 3, the first priority area of government is agri-industrialization. Agri-industrialization, and the government is now putting a lot of money into it. But if lawyers are not, embracing agro-industrialization, not from the practice of maybe planting or trade, but also offering legal services, doing litigation, doing also the non-contentious issues of maybe conveyancing, maybe contracts, maybe licenses, maybe. Before we do that, as civil society, I think we will continue to have lamentations and we will continue to have many statistics that are showing that people are not, or we are eating, contaminated food. We are facing violation of our rights because this very strategic and important profession called law is not part of this particular food. Yesterday, I was invited to go to UK. There is a conference, and I decided to I Googled conferences on food in UK. Each month, I was shocked to see a number of conferences concerning legal issues on food. And I'm like, okay, how many conferences on legal aspects of food do we have in Uganda? Maybe we also need as us to do a lot of work. And maybe this is now taking me to a human rights-based approach and public interest litigation and I want to demonstrate how this is very important in taking forward the right to food. Well, we all know that the right to food as a justiciable, legally enforceable right is a recent invention. People have not, or in the past 50 years, from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights time, the right to adequate food was just looked at it as a moral, intervention where maybe people have hunger, and then you bring in maybe food portions. And many people did not, even at international level, it was not looked at as a right. Interestingly or sadly, even up to now, I meet many lawyers who ask me a question, you guys, what are you doing? What kind of legal issue is in food? We've had food, what are you? So, including lawyers, sadly, including lawyers. So, we still have a problem where people do not look at a critical component of their life as a legal issue. Why on earth would people think that something that you put in your body when you wake up, because even water is part of food, sugar, of course, people will tell you eating sugar, you must eat in moderation, but it is part of food. When you wake up, the first thing people think about is, can I take a glass of water? Can I take juice? Where is the breakfast? And after that first breakfast, people will eat and eat. You see, Dr. Milton was talking about portions. A child, how many portions a child must eat in a day? We all know how human beings relate with children, the precious human beings. If we are subjecting them to contaminated substances, I don't even want to call it food, because if it is not safe, then it is not food. But many people are running away, or they are not open to the issue of the legalities around this particular, critical component of their life, food. Why would a person think that something that you're going to put directly into your stomach, into your body, is not a legal issue? But after some time, the world started thinking about food with some proclamations that came up, and then we started hearing about the notion to start discussing food as a human right. In 1996, the first World Food Summit provided the first breakthrough, where the head of state and government convened in Rome and said, we must make sure that there is some, normative content. There is something that we can look at and say, okay, this is it. If you want to determine the right food, these are the elements. And in 1980, we saw this celebrated publisher, Amartya Sen, who said that the problem is not about availability of food, but the problem is inaccessibility, accessibility of food, accessibility in terms of physical accessibility, but also in terms of financial accessibility. I have listened to the presentation of Dr. Ruth, the findings from Karamoja. Why on earth would Ugandans in Karamoja drop dead because of hunger? Between you and me, you know that when you wake up and maybe you've not eaten breakfast, or maybe you have skipped lunch, or maybe you have fasted for a day, you can just feel how miserable you. Sometimes you can't even reason when you are hungry. But we have a section of Ugandans who year in, year out experience this horrible feeling and leading to death. Why on earth a person in Uganda drop dead because they've not eaten and hunger? Yet in some parts of the country, there is abundance. In other parts of the country, people are crying that they harvested, they have a big harvest, maybe a batch of matoke is costing 5,000 or 10,000. And in some parts of the country, you have people who are struggling to even sell their maize. And then another part of that particular country, you have someone who is dying, in fact, who has died and has been buried because they have no food. It is an issue of law. It is an issue of legal responsibility. It is an issue of failure. It is an issue of omission, where the duty bearers, like Dr. Ruth said, and here we are talking about the government, failing in its duty, in its primary duty of making sure that the population is nourished, the population, is functional. It is failure to observe and realize the constitutional mandate on the part of government. For example, we all know that, or we may not know, but this is science, there is what they call the golden window of opportunity, where it is calculated from the day of conception, from the day when the woman becomes pregnant, to 2 years when a human being is born. The scientists have told us from World Health Organization, from Ministry of Health here in Uganda, that is a golden window of opportunity of cognitive development and capacity of any person. If you want to give anyone open chances and open opportunities, you must impact that time. And that time is only impacted when people are feeding well, when the mother is eating well, when the child is eating well, when the child is exclusively breastfed from when they are 6 months. But are we observing that when we a mother may be dying? Have we even done an audit to find out how many died when they were pregnant? How many women, maybe in Karamoja, failed to get food when they were breastfeeding? How many men have now had maybe sex and they are giving us human beings who will be weaklings in life? Because for you to have very good seed, and here I don't want to sound vulgar, but to have very good serious sperm and maybe the ova that will make a human being, it is all dependent on food. But there must be regulation, there must be laws, because we all know that not everyone can afford to have food all the time. And it must be government's role to come in and say, okay, in this particular country, a part of the country where there is no plenty, we can create and come up with either physical infrastructure or to distribute food and to make sure that food in that particular part of the country is affordable. But after that, in 1996, after the summit, we now saw that we got the General Comment number 12, which now tries to unpack the elements of the right to food, and these elements have already been brought out clearly. And many other processes have happened, including the voluntary guidelines. Maybe to you, my fellow presenters, maybe an absence of a stand-alone international convention on food is also a limiting factor, which I don't want to go into. But you wonder, countries like Uganda, why shouldn't you have a law? Why? It is because government has decided continuously and in our face to violate our rights. And nobody is speaking about it. When you read the Constitution, the government has a constitutional obligation to cause massive awareness. Massive. The word that is written in our Constitution is massive. Between you and me, have we seen this massive awareness about nutrition, about the dangers of failing to eat, how you are supposed to eat, about the dangers that our children are going to face? And this one does not only concern poor people. No. Even the rich people cannot run away from meat because their children are feeding on junk. Their children are also feeding on contaminated food. According to Makerere University School of Public Health, 98% of the food sold in the main markets in Kampala is contaminated, not only with pathogens and other bacterial infectations, but also with chemicals that are, some of them are even carcinogenic. When you are talking about the cancers, the answer is there. Farmers in Uganda can spray everything, And even vendors in the markets add more other chemicals, including other hygiene issues, which I don't want to go into. Why wouldn't we as a people wake up and say, no, it is not safe if it is not safe for everyone? Because even including me, Kawanda, I can't eat from my home all the time. Dear lawyers, you all know that every time we go out to work, maybe sometimes the case is in Masindi, maybe sometimes you have to go to Masaka, you have to go to Barara. Okay, you stay in Yolo Farm in Kampala, on Kampala Road. You will not eat from your home. We have these ladies who bring food to our tables in our chambers. I have been in a law firm before. I know how things work, and I know how many lawyers eat. Even if you've not eaten from your law chamber, maybe you have gone to Serena. For those who can eat from those what they call maybe 5-star hotels, which I think that as far as food is concerned, that debate needs to be reignited, because in many of the hotels in Kampala, I can't eat food. Because they tell you this is a buffet. You look at it from the starting point to the last point, there is nothing that you can eat in their buffet. When you call the chef and ask them to explain the chemicals or the spices that they use to make that food, they can't explain. We are choking and are eating trans fats. Trans fats have been banned elsewhere in the world. In Uganda, it is open importation, trans fats. We are eating the blue bands in bread, in all the food. So I'm trying to show you how important it is for us to wake up as lawyers and put a stop to this madness of food industry, to this inaction of government, to this, exploitation of food industry, of seed industry, of chemical industries. When states commit to advancing the realization of the right to food, because they have ratified these international covenants, like my colleague said, I don't want to go back to, they are bound by the state obligations. They are bound, and they must be held accountable if they fail to meet such obligations. And even beyond the international law, where government has not signed and they have committed, creating a legitimate expectation on our part. Maybe I need to explain that further. When the government of Uganda signs international treaties, beyond the commitments and the obligations in those treaties, in law, it has created a legitimate expectation. And us as citizens have already a cause of action, because I legitimately expect the government to adhere to, observe, fulfill all those legal obligations in the international treaties. Dear fellow lawyers, even at only that level, we can hold the government accountable. Accountability is an essential element of making the right to food and its corresponding obligations meaningful. If we disassociate accountability from the debate and the discussion that we have, then it is meaningless. Someone has to be accountable. I'm not a food scientist. When I go on in a supermarket or in a shop to buy food, I buy it with the confidence that I have a government in a place that can, enforce standards, that can enforce food, recognize the practices, food processing practices. Today, at the media center, UNBS is going to be, I think they have even finished the press briefing about the maize standard, the maize flour. I speak to you all loyally. Stop eating maize flour. Stop eating posho in Uganda because it is not safe. UNBS, go to their website. They have clearly indicated that many dealers in Uganda have refused to change the machines to food grade machines. We are eating metal in the maize flour. We are eating metal in the groundnuts. We are eating metal. Beyond the aflatoxins, there is that other aspect of metal. Who is accountable? How will I know that this portion has metal? It should be government to do assessment, to issue licenses, to do monitoring of these food processing plants. Yes, we need them, the flour. But if the flour has cancer-causing materials, then government cannot run away from its obligation and we must hold them accountable. So we clearly see that since then, when we got the let us now, maybe from the accountability angle and the discussion that I have already put up, let us look at a few cases that I have looked up here and there. Maybe to let us as lawyers know that the right to food is justiciable. We can hold players accountable, not only government, but also private companies. But the challenge in Uganda, we have a syndrome of I don't care, I think, let me call it I don't care attitude. Someone goes to the supermarket, they pick items as if someone is chasing them, as if it is not their money. So in the end, they even eat and take their loved ones at home expired products. If you have not even cared to look at the expiry date, will you care to look at the nutrition content which the manufacturer has either not provided, or if they put it there, it is in a language that you don't understand and in very, very small print? We have asked the government to enforce front of the pack labeling, like other countries who are using, like if the product is high in sugar, fat, and in salt, you put bread, a marked bread, such that if I pick to eat it, I must be put on notice. Because the right we are talking about is not the right to be fed. We are not saying that the government should give people food, because they can't. You saw what happened during COVID-19. Even when they tried, they miserably failed. What we ask them to do is to just create an enabling legal and policy environment for people to be able to feed themselves in dignity, whether as an individual, whether as a household, whether as a woman or a man, whether as a child, a girl, a boy, because our nutritional requirements are vast and diverse and different. This is what Dr. Peter was explaining. So the government, you see, the right to adequate food is not about forcing government to feed people, except in emergencies. Like if COVID-19 has come and you have many people who have been feeding hand to mouth and you want them to be locked away, it is your obligation now to make sure that they have access to food. When you look at the Constitution of Uganda, government of Uganda is under a constitutional duty to establish national food reserves. Since 1995, we don't have these reserves. We don't have them. Maybe we need to have, we wouldn't be having a problem of 65% of our school-going children in Uganda staying at school hungry. 65% of Ugandan children are spending the entire day in schools hungry. They don't have food. Why shouldn't Ugandan government have a national food system, and maybe schools can buy from those national stores at a relatively cheaper price? Maybe even the school fee would be low. Maybe children would not be dropping out of school. Maybe girl children would not be even getting early pregnancies, because statistics show that many of these girls are getting these pregnancies because the border guy has brought a chapati. It is all a failure on part of the government. So we have seen many countries now coming up to use courts to hold governments accountable in case where they fail, to ensure the right to be free from hunger. And some of the cases are in this presentation, and I'll share it. Courts in several countries have showed little hesitation to step in to solve situations in which survival was threatened due to government inaction or inefficiency. And the majority of the cases concerned failures by government authorities to provide minimum levels of subsistence for the affected individuals or communities, to ensure a fundamental right to be free from hunger. To be free from hunger. I think the cluster must come together and work with the Uganda Society. For this, I think I have been listening to the presentation from Dr. Ruth, and I'm like, no, now this is what is going to happen. All those people who died, there must be an audit, and the government of Uganda must compensate the families of those people who died because of hunger. They did not die a natural death. They died because someone has not performed their legal duty. We are not talking about a moral obligation here. We are talking about a legal duty. We are talking about a constitutional mandate on the part of the government. You even have early warning signs. You even have an agency to warn you that we are going to face droughts. And the issue of Karamoja has not just started. Last time, I was so excited when I heard the president of this country telling us that Uganda has a capacity of feeding 200 million people per day. And like, oh, maybe the government, maybe we need to have another conversation with the president to know that his people, the people he leads in Karamoja, died recently. And who knows whether they are even continuing to die right now. Dear fellow lawyers, in 2007 in Brazil, a case was filed. Again, because there was no food and people were suffering from hunger. And the judgment from the Supreme Court of Brazil was like, the government is responsible. And the reasoning was grounded both on domestic provisions protecting the right to food and international human rights treaties. And that is where I started from, by demonstrating that if government goes ahead to sign these international treaties, they not only commit to those provisions in the treaties and obligations, but to us as the people, they create a legitimate expectation, and they cannot run away from it. They only have to fulfill it. In India, we have many cases, but I have picked one of the celebrated cases, the People's Union for Civil Liberties versus Union of India. It is one of those cases that have demonstrated well and expanding, the definition and the discussion around food, including because their Article 21 is an equivalent of our Article 22 on the right to life. In the discussion of this particular case, the court noted with the lawyers that were in the case that life is not a gradually. You cannot talk about right to life when people do not have the aspects that nourish their body, the finer graces of life, finer graces of life. And what we are asking for from government is not too much. We are asking for the bare minimum. Bare minimum. Dr. Lukundo can tell you that research is showing that the calories intake for many Ugandans is below the bare minimum. So in this particular case, court said you cannot say that people have a right to life when they cannot have food. So if people do not have food, now you cannot talk about the right to life. In practical terms, the People's Union for Civil Liberties sought enforcement of existing food distribution schemes. At least in India, there is a food distribution scheme, which we do not have in Uganda. And the court decided and said, because of that failure, government violated the right to adequate food of the people in India. And the Supreme Court again famously acknowledged that plenty of food is available, but distribution of the same amongst the very poor and the destitute is scarce and non-existent. And the same thing applies to Uganda or to East Africa generally. When we talk about food availability, is there a mechanism? Is there an infrastructure, whether set out in government documents or physically, to make sure that the food is got from where it is plenty to where it is scarce, maybe to the poor people? It is very possible. And has government demonstrated that they have come up with maybe schemes, plans, or programs to make sure that this recurrent problem in some parts of the country does not, reoccur, beyond the hunger that we see that is dropping people dead? We also have the hidden hunger, malnutrition in all its forms. Why should we have people in the individual suffering malnutrition in parts of Potro, in the eastern part of the country, and also in northern part of the country? Why should we have people? So this is what the Supreme Court of India is bringing out. The court acknowledged that inefficiencies and failure to implement existing legislation and policies rather than lack of resources were the root causes of the problem. And this also applies to Uganda. If you already have a constitution that is telling you what to do and you don't do it, then maybe it is because you have refused to implement the constitution the way it is. The court also added that mere schemes without any implementation are of no use. And the court stressed that what is important is that the food must reach the hungry. That is the Supreme Court of India. And you say India also applies common law. So this particular decision has a strong force of application in Uganda. So I think as lawyers, we can see, and from this particular decision, the court changed, the government changed. Of course, we still have some parts of India having hunger, but at least you find that the government comes up with schemes to help out the people who are very hungry. Now, dear lawyers, we need to look at the practice that happens in the garden as a legal issue, how people kill the soil, the biodiversity, the ecosystems by killing everything, violating and violating the right to nature protected under Section 4 of the NEMA Act. then the production, how people produce these crops, then the harvesting and post-harvesting. People apply all sorts of chemicals in the maize, or in how they handle the post-harvest, then the transportation. You have seen how animals are transported, particularly cows, from wherever they are, they are brought to the abattoirs in Kampala. By the time they slaughter the cow, and by the time you eat this substance on your plate that you call meat, it is no longer meat. It is no longer food, because if it is not safe, it is not food. Then the distribution, the processing, I have already talked about this, the serving. They are lawyers. Even when you go back to your houses, can you examine and look at the cookware, the saucepans? Are you eating from a saucepan, or you are eating from a building material? Because the way heat affects the food we eat, and how the chemical reactions happen when the particular, particular apparatus is applied to fire, also determines the quality of food that you'll eat. Many of us are eating food that has been, prepared in building materials that we call saucepans. Have you taken keen interest in the salt that you are eating in your food? Even the plate, even the fork or spoon. Some of them wear off. You have in your house, you look at a spoon or a fork which is wearing out, but you are continuously using it. So maybe these are the things that we need to look into. In Uganda, as a front, we are very honored. We have been on the streets trying to promote the right to adequate food. During COVID-19, we are happy to have this celebrated case where the High Court decided that every Ugandan has a right to food, only that we appealed on one point where the court refused to hold the government on its failure to have national food reserves in place. We are now in the Court of Appeal, particularly on that issue. We are in the East African Court of Justice to challenge two issues. First, the GMO. Transpired has talked about the GMOs, and maybe lawyers, this should be your very wide area, because when it comes here, Kenya has opened up, meaning that big intellectual property issues are coming in the region. Who has violated whose rights? Plant breeders' rights, plant varieties, then hybrids, then GMOs. All these plant intellectual property issues. It is up to us as lawyers to take the bull by its horns when it comes to biopiracy, nutrition issues, and the allergies that come because of GMO food. Then the seed issues, seed rights, seed equity, seed sovereignty, and the food, and also defending the people. Now, you cannot talk about litigation without talking about remedies. Restitution, for example, it can be a remedy when it comes to the right to food. I think that I have overstretched my time, and I'm ending in the next 2 minutes. Jonathan. Then cessation from the violation of such a right, or guarantees of non-repetition. This could be against private actors in the food industry, in the seed industry, but also in the chemical industry. It could also be rehabilitation. Communities like Karamoja must be rehabilitated. If we are talking about 54% of Ugandans who are old people, but they suffered attachments when they were young, maybe some of the problems that we have as a country can easily be explained. And we are not ready to put a stop at that by now making sure that the young people have exclusively breastfed, fed well, fed on safe food, but also the correct portion. Then we have another remedy of compensation. It could be in kind or in cash. These are some of the remedies that you can ask for. Or we can also trade in our cases for systematic remedies. For example, coming up with laws or coming up with regulations or coming up with structural integrity where government should be responsible and do maybe monitoring and evaluation and maybe report back to the country or to the court on how people's right to adequate food is being realized. I want to stop here. Thank you so much. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Councillor Kabanda. I really want to thank you for this expansive discussion. We have now delved deeper into this to understand the right to food and its content in the litigation world. Allow me to throw in a quick question before going back to Councillor Silva Kayondo. The question is on how then do we distill, there is this land question that is coming up among vulnerable women, particularly these that come for us to help them with a narrative that the husband has thrown him out of land and it is the land that she accesses food. So, or it's the land that she has the house, she has no shelter, so she has no alternative. How can we bring in the land question vis-a-vis promoting the right to food using the Human Rights Enforcement Act? I think, Councillor Kabanda, that you will help us also dive deeper into responding to that. However, let me ask Councillor Silva Kayondo. I hope you are on the call now. On the issue of the GMOs, we know that our food is our identity. And when you talk about the seed system, the seed system shapes our food. For us to get clean food and healthy diets, we should have a quality food system that is clearly shaped. However, looking at that, we are seeing the GMO world coming up to take over the space in our country. And I know that in intellectual property to do with the GMOs, they patent a gene. And wherever the gene goes, it is considered as for the manufacturer. In this regard, do we see GMOs as a ploy to stealing the seed among our African societies? I want us to explore that area to see how farmers get out of the seed system when there is an invasion of GMOs. And the cases that we have, the case in point, the Monsanto versus Schema case in Canada, where you can explore to us deeper into that. Thank you so much, Council. As also other colleagues can request for them, and then they can be elevated as a panelist to ask or have deliberations on this topical discussion. Yes, Council Council Silva, kindly unmute and respond.
Okay. Yeah, Jonathan, I hope I can be heard clearly this time.
Yes, you can be heard.
Yeah, no. So I think you asked pertinent questions around IP rights and yeah, the strategy around that. So the Monsanto versus Schema was an interesting case in Canada. I think it's available online for guys who want to read. So briefly, the facts are that Schema was a farmer. I think he used to grow canola, which is like a vegetable oil crop. And so there had been a product for Monsanto that had been released to the public, I think for Roundup, that purportedly would increase crop yield and things like that. So it was patented, and for any farmer to use that, they needed to pay for a license from Monsanto. So Schema notices that part of his yield actually has that crop. He claims he didn't know how it came onto his farm. Other theories say maybe the wind blew over another farmer's farm and brought that crop onto his farm, and then somehow he had it. It had better yield, I think 60% yield, and then somehow Monsanto, which is a GMO company, caught wind that this guy had their product. He harvested, preserved, and then replanted even for the next season. So a patent infringement case was brought about against him, went all the way to the Canadian Supreme Court, where actually the Supreme Court found him in violation of IP rights, patent rights, I think under Section 42 of the Canadian Patents Act. However, they didn't award damages against him because, I mean, it couldn't be explained as to how that crop got onto his garden. But I mean, such situations could definitely arise. You have these uncontrolled environments where you cannot be in control of things like wind blowing over your farm or things like that, or foreign elements introducing these patented breeds into your farm. So I wouldn't outrightly say maybe there is a ploy to take over African seeds or not, but I'm aware that whatever can be made for good can also be abused for bad. So some could use that maybe as a tool to expropriate IP rights, the way we've seen with expropriation of other African assets and cultures, maybe artifacts, maybe artworks, even, I mean, colonial sort of mentality around these kinds of things. I mean, whenever there is a new innovation, all these things come up. I mean, in the space law thing now, there is a very big debate on the role of African space in research and development. Should Africa be paid or not for space explorations and things like that? So to us, I think as lawyers, it's about how we fashion maybe those remedies or how better we advocate for these kinds of activities. I'm aware that, for instance, there cannot be exclusion. Say, we can also not dictate to farmers what they grow. So maybe there should be choice in the sense that farmers who choose to grow organic products should be available to do that. Maybe those who want GMOs should also do that. The essence of labeling and tracing is precisely that. So I think for me, the framework around that needs to be balanced against commercial use, but also against traditional community rights. So that's what I would say about that. Maybe at some other point I'll come in to give a bit of concluding remarks basing on the provocative presentation that's made by Mr. Kawanda, who's obviously very passionate about this area. So let me leave it at that and then give the chance to other speakers.
Yes, thank you so much, Councillor Silva. You've done justice to giving out the Monsanto versus Schema case. Others call it the Goliath case, David versus Goliath case. So with that, we can explore more. Going back to Councillor David on the issue of the land question and vis-a-vis promoting the right to food and the Human Rights Enforcement Act with its opportunities, how can we see the legal fraternity embracing this law to promote the right to food, especially of the vulnerable people? Mr. Kawanda?
Jonathan, maybe before I go to that, I want to thank you, Councillor Silva, but maybe to add for fellow lawyers on the call, we need now to get ready for the GMO madness. Whether you like it or not, GMO industries is huge, and I think they picked a lot of interest in Africa, and they are already in South Africa, We have some GMOs in Egypt, in Kenya, and we are running a danger, because when you listen to what Council Kayondo, that particular case from Canada, they have controlled gardens, but still the fields that are not GMO were contaminated. But after protracted legal battle, the case was decided in the favor of the seed company, that if they find traces of that GMO gene, then they have the right to get royalties from you. You must pay them. But we clearly see issues of biopiracy, because these guys come and pick the indigenous varieties. They use those, very, indigenous varieties, and they introduce the GMO, genes in them. They have not paid for communities that have been, breeding these varieties for centuries. They don't pay for that. And if you have your garden and it is not a GMO garden, but maybe a neighbor has a GMO garden and the pollen, maybe, the wind is blowing and it contaminates your garden, you'll pay them. Then the issues of, enslaving many Ugandans into slavery, because now you will never have seed that you can preserve as you and maybe share among the community members. But maybe beyond that, lawyers can see other commercial or, business-related ideas, because the seed is a very huge industry. Now, on the issue of land, I want to encourage lawyers that are listening to me that we have suffered with land cases, and many Ugandans are suffering because of land-related issues. Many women have been illegally evicted. It could even be by their husbands or what. We have found an antidote to that. It is the Human Rights Enforcement Act. Kindly read it and understand it. Don't file cases anymore using the ordinary conventional, procedures of the plain word. Use the notice of motion under that law. Go to court, bring your evidence by affidavit. Before you know it, you have finished the case, in a record time that no one can ever imagine. Cases of land are in court between 5 to 10 years. But I'm here to tell you that our organization has used this law, and we have finished cases in 2, 3, 4 months, maybe 9 months, or 1 year, those which have really taken a lot of time. And maybe we would have even finished them if parties were cooperative. So we want to encourage colleagues, legal colleagues, to now embrace the Human Rights Enforcement Act, because it gives you results quickly and many people are benefiting. We can help many people, even if it is a walk-in client and a paid human. Why do you suffer with the planes and what, yet you can just use the Human Rights Enforcement Act? Because what you are enforcing is the right to property, the right to land. Go to court and claim it as a right. Don't just go to court and say, the court of action is this under the Land Act. No. We now use the Human Rights Enforcement Act, and before you know it, the court makes that declaration and your client gets back the land. I know this can open up a very big debate. Maybe we'll have another time when we have expansive discussion on the procedures and how we can partake the provisions, the very good provisions under the Human Rights Enforcement Act. I want to stop here for now. Thank you so much, colleagues. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Councillor David Kavanda. The discussion has been expansive. We have looked at how food stems and how people should use the law to promote the right to food, to promote their own well-being, and also to expansively discern these issues in their intellectual debates. We have comments coming in from colleagues online, and I will read them through as then Council Silva Kayondo will prepare to give us his parting shots, and then we shall conclude with closing remarks. From Samuel, he's saying, Mr. Kabanda, thank you for the passionate presentation. He's saying that the lawyers are pursuing this course, and soon we shall be knowledgeable about the topic. My humble opinion is that we need to sensitize and educate the masses about the dangers associated with processed foods, the unsafe cookware, etc. We need to hold the government accountable for the lack of implementation of the laws that Dr. Ruth describes as good laws, which are but only on paper. Good governance practices, which would otherwise drive us to targets as a country, are certainly missing or inadequate. Michael Mara saying, GMO madness will finally finish off Africa's health and environment. It will kill all Africa and indigenous seed variety and introduce toxins in the garden. You can imagine the slavery of poor communities going to buy seeds from shops or supermarkets. It will most definitely affect gravely food sovereignty of the African people. It kills Ubuntu. Thank you so much, Michael. I wish you could give us a word or two in this regard to GMOs. We have Francis saying, as much as I agree that there is a big role for lawyers to play here, but the driving force needs to be government or parliament. Thank you, Francis. Gerard saying sometimes litigation shapes policy making. Therefore, I believe as lawyers, we play a pivotal role in this. Thank you. And then Michael once again saying that GMO used in Africa seed is another way to neocolonialism in effect, to keep Africa reliant on the West or colonizers. Thank you, all of you, for your wonderful views and expression. Government is like court, it is moved to act. Oh, okay, this is Luvega Serunyigo Idrisa giving in his comment in the chat. Without further ado, allow me to call upon Council Silva Kayondo to give in his parting shots towards this discussion.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. I think Mr. Kabanda is not wrong when he says there is interest of the GMO industry in Africa. I mean, this is not just out of the blue. If you're to look, I mean, Africa still has most of the world's virgin land resources. I think about 65% of Africa's land is arable. So, I mean, so that's a very nice, compelling proposition. We have very nice water. I mean, the Nile, Victoria, Congo basins are among the world's biggest water resources. So from that perspective, we are good. We have cheap research and development. Africa is one of the few areas in the world where you go to do things, they even give you land. On top of giving you land, you'll probably even find local researchers willing to affiliate with your research teams and things like that. We have experience in those research and development initiatives, particularly in healthcare and agriculture. That's how we've been able to overcome things like Ebola, malaria, HIV, and things like that. So these frameworks are already tested from global north academic institutions and researchers with local teams here. And then also we do not have heavy regulation. One thing I'll tell you from an innovation perspective is that innovators are really scared of areas with very high regulation. So the opportunity for lawyers lies where there is no regulation or when the regulation is not clear. So if things are clear and well streamed and defined, then they are processed. So the lawyer is only checking boxes of compliance here and there and things. But to be able to affiliate with international law firms that are advising clients on these matters when they unfold in Uganda, you need much more than just a compliance sort of tick box exercise. They want real practical on-ground support in knowing beyond the industry, beyond the seed, how is the fertilizer framework, how are the herbicides, pesticides, etc. regulated, what are the export controls, what infrastructure is in place, particularly for laboratories, because the lack of laboratories itself is an opportunity for the GMO companies, because that means they cannot be fact-checked. Whatever they tell you is the chemical composition or whatever of their products will be largely taken as gospel truth or things like that. And maybe from a wider geopolitical perspective is that you know that many countries, you talked of Egypt, are relying maybe on the Nile resource or the Nile basin for the agriculture sector. So this will spill over into aspects of water law and water sharing of those transboundary resources that are powering these agriculture sectors. So whereas everyone is maybe concerned about the Chinese invasion of Africa, maybe through infrastructure, or maybe the American resurgence or things like that, I think we need to pay attention to things like the Russia and Ukrainian conflict, because what the Russia and Ukrainian conflict has done is that it has caused maybe shortage of essential commodities like wheat. So for wheat-dependent communities, maybe in Middle East and North Africa that eat a lot of bread and things like that, the ultimate international relations strategies go to Africa, buy land, and then plant things and have them come to Uganda, to maybe Dubai or Egypt or wherever where you can transport them by sea, then across. So that means that African land conflict will have a lot of external drivers beyond the local actors, but also our water resources will be stressed, which may lead to water resource conflicts and things like that. So there are also national security considerations as we discuss these things. And I'm happy to provide a position paper maybe to the Attorney General or to the Uganda Law Society on how some of these things are unfolding and how we can adequately position East Africa and Uganda to make sure that at least we have key negotiating frameworks for local communities to deal or to be aware of such of these risks that are coming to us very soon. I thank you all for your kind audience, and I look forward to further interactions in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Council Silva. Our previous panelists have, I think, have been, okay, they are not on the call right now. However, I will wish to invite Council Kavanda to give his to give us closing remarks for this webinar, as well as the Executive Director of SEFROT and also as the host of the Uganda Law Society Food and Nutrition Cluster. Thank you so much. You are welcome, Council Kavanda.
Thank you so much. Jonathan, I don't want colleagues to think that when we mentioned that we'll be ending at noon, we stretch the time, but I'll use just 1 minute to thank you so much, colleagues, fellow lawyers that have joined this morning. I clearly can see your commitment because we have been on the call 54 people ever since we started, only that just 2-3 people have dropped off. This one is showing me that we have at least 54 lawyers in Uganda who are committed, and maybe others that we can continue bringing on board as a cluster. We are very committed as the host of the cluster. We are very committed to build it further, only that sometimes many lawyers, like we said from the beginning, don't think or see that food and agriculture sector is also a very virgin sector, and it presents many opportunities, both at the side of social justice, but also commercial litigation. But we will continue engaging and also putting bare these opportunities and maybe conferences that come up to discuss these particular issues. I want to thank you so much, and I will end by asking you, before you eat today, please find out where that food is coming from, and maybe when you go back home, let us make sure that the cookware is fit and proper or safe to prepare our food. We need a safe and healthy population and a new generation. Thank you so much, as we use legal principles and tools to promote the right to adequate food for everyone in Uganda, in East Africa, and in Africa generally. I want to end our conversation here. I want to thank so much Uganda Law Society. Doreen is still here. Thank you so much. I don't know whether the CEO is still here. Winifred is here. Thank you so much. Goodwin is here. Thank you so much, Doreen, for making this possible. And maybe we can organize many more interactions and discussions. I also want to thank you, Jonathan, for moderating the sessions. For now, I declare the training closed till when we do another training. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Council. I think now the Uganda Law Society is having the mandate to close that session.
Thank you, members, for attending this session, and the panelists for the great insights and picking the baton for this, nuanced sector, emerging sector that we are not very alive to. Yeah, we are happy to always support to make sure that this conversation is wide and we have more of these, both at cluster level and as inclusive as possible for the entire membership. Thanks again for sparing the time and being part of this. You can join us this afternoon for another webinar. This is free on the Organ Trade Act that is being discussed, and look out for other events that we have next week so that you can be part of those as well. Thank you so much and have a good afternoon.
Good afternoon.